Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week it's our special subject on Imitations of Life. We'll be discussing Fannie Hurst's 1933 novel, then the 1934 film directed by John Stahl, and the 1959 film directed by Douglas Sirk, both of those at Universal.
So this is going to be a long one, we anticipate. We've got a lot of material to cover and a lot of things to discuss, so we hope you have some kind of kennel warmth that you can curl up in, or perhaps a safe space to hide in as we discuss the issues of the three Imitations of Life.
Yes, this is going to be an unusually trigger-filled episode. We're obviously going to do our best to handle all of this material with the most tact and sensitivity that we can.
Yeah, but you know that we aren't that tactful or sensitive.
We're certainly well-meaning.
We're going to try.
We do understand if you're out there and you don't really care to hear about such vexed issues dealing with terrible, terrible trauma inflicted upon African Americans by white supremacy.
As imagined by
a white person.
Mainly white people.
A group of white people.
There are some black people involved in the making of these films, but mainly white people.
And again, we also cannot make any claim to having any understanding of what it's really like to undergo these traumas, so we're going to do our best. If you don't want to listen to two white Canadians discussing this, we understand. But on the other hand, if you're ready, so are we.
Yeah, starting with the edition of Fannie Hurst's novel. So where and when did this come out, Dave?
The novel came out in 1933. The edition that we read, however, was restored to in-print status by Duke University Press. It's from 2004, edited by Daniel Itzkovitz.
In his introduction, he talks about how he hopes that this new scholarly edition will revive interest in Fannie Hurst because she has been eclipsed for reasons of, perhaps, he speculates, literary fashion, might be recuperated by feminism. This does not seem to have happened. However, film fans like us, scattered throughout the internet, do seem to be taking an interest in Fannie Hurst and many other popular authors that have been neglected by academia, but who had famous movies, or just movies, made from them, just early movies made from their novels. And so this is very interesting to see, the fact that sites like Kobo have put together cheap editions of writers like Fannie Hurst and Edna Ferber and Lloyd C. Douglas, presumably because that interest exists out there, and you can see that people are actually reading these novels because they get reviewed on Goodreads.
Yeah, the films of that era are gateways to the popular literature of that era. That's how it worked for me, certainly. I had never gotten around to Fannie Hurst, but she was always on my list, and now I'm eager to read more.
And in my first and lesser period of cinephilia, where I was hanging out with filmmakers and film professors, I'm not sure if anyone said this to me in so many words, but I sort of absorbed the general idea that Hollywood movies, studio-era movies, contrary to what traditional elites think, they can be art. But if they took their sources from popular literature, that could not be art. They were always transmuting trash into great popular art. And now I'm starting to actually take the time to read some of these novels and question that narrative that I thought I would never in life get around to being able to question, but this podcast has provided us with an opportunity.
Yeah, and we'll certainly be doing some more of that in the future. I think that narrative works really well with Kiss Me Deadly.
Mike Hammer.
A lot of the time, it really fails to provide any kind of insight into the novels of the period, many of which are quite thrilling and fascinating.
So we've talked about Fannie Hurst before. Actually, I think it was in our Studios Year by Year episode where we talked about
Backstreet.
Yeah, but I think even before that, Symphony of 6 Million was when I first decided to look her up on Wikipedia, and my tiny mind was blown by the fact that this author who had been despised really critically despised in a way that is parallel to treatment of Jerry Lewis by film critics for decades, that she was so politically cool and so eccentric and avant-garde in her private life.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I read her autobiography this week. She still had 10 years to go after that and kept writing fiction, but she was about 70 when that was written, and she was looking back at quite a long life in letters. Even at that time, 1958, she talks as if she's going to be forgotten as soon as she's not alive anymore.
So she's come to terms with this.
She knows critics hate her.
And she understands how cultural production works and that she needs the critics because her audience is going to pass away with her.
Right. So this is not someone like J.P. Marcon, who's another person I discovered this year that I love reading. Galsworthy, someone we talked about last week. These were people that critics really liked. But then, obviously, as things tilted more and more towards emphasizing the canons of modernism, these people writing at that time, but in a different key or different register, were more and more forgotten. But Fannie Hurst, while she was popular, was being derided daily.
Like Jerry Lewis, she just became a byword for lack of quality.
When you read her autobiography, she talks about how the worst thing about all of this is that people talk as if I'm writing down to the audience, but I'm not writing down. That just means I am down.
The difference is, of course, that Jerry Lewis always had a group of elite cinephiles defending him.
Right.
And making great claims for him, in fact. And this is just not the case for Fannie Hurst.
Well, she certainly did have some champions.
Well, she had some champions in the Harlem Renaissance, friends.
Right. And others who...
And others who disagreed in the Harlem Renaissance.
Of course. But there were people that loved her work at the important magazines. Not the New Yorker, not the really highbrow magazines, but the Saturday Evening Post and Cosmopolitan and other places like that.
Gonna make the Jerry Lewis parallel again, because early on in her career, as Itzkovitz talks about, she was celebrated by critics as a great find, and then, God knows why, in either case, it started to turn. But when it turned hard, and it turned permanent, and it was very sour.
Yes. People don't think that she's a good writer, a polished writer, a disciplined writer.
A lot of that can be projection.
Well, a lot of it is.
Then some of it isn't.
Right. So the one thing it doesn't read like is run-of-the-mill, trashy, popular fiction. It's so idiosyncratic. It's so unique unto itself.
It's an unfolding, blossoming thing coming straight out of her own unconscious.
And this is how she writes, because her autobiography is written pretty much the same way. It is not normal, quote-unquote, bad writing.
She's not following any kind of, canons of taste or quality or method or structure. Even in the Itzkovitz introduction, he talks about how her novels, he talks about them in ordinary terms of popular novels, saying that they're very plot-driven. What plot?
Yeah.
What plot? This is I don't know, what did it amount to in print? Because I read the ebook version.
About 300 pages.
300 pages of stream of consciousness, of a single character's consciousness, and boy does it stream. And an occasional external event impinges on the edges, mostly this subplot of what's going on with Delilah and Piola.
Again,
but there's no plot.
No, this is a very avant-garde writing style as far as I am concerned. This is not like anything else people would have been reading, but it was immensely, immensely popular. People got in sync with it, obviously. Everything she wrote did well.
And her metaphors are wild.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as Sterling Brown, Harlem Renaissance critic, points out, absurd. But, like I said, it's just all coming straight out of her unconscious. I guess we plunged into discussing the novel and bypassed a lot of Fannie Hurst biography, so maybe we'll mention some of that as we go along.
We'll weave it back in.
So what it was making me think of, this novel, was the term that came to mind for me was Northern Gothic, even though she did grow up in Missouri.
Missouri is the Midwest, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not even it's not even considered the South, eh?
One of those states that's on the cusp. It was a border state during the Civil War. It did have slavery, but slavery was not an important enough part of its economy for it to secede. So it was not a Confederate state.
Before? Have we discussed Missouri before?
Kentucky.
Was that what we discussed with Judge Priest?
Yeah.
Okay,
Kentucky is next to Missouri. That one also was a border state. It was more of a slave state in terms of percentage. Missouri was like a real battleground. It's next to Kansas. Kansas is where there was actually a civil war before the Civil War, where people were killing each other over whether it would be a slave state or not. But we know, even in the North in the United States, racial politics were terrible as well. So,
but remember what I was saying when we did the episode on Doll's Backstreet, that it was like a horror movie.
Yeah.
And this too reads like some kind of gothic fiction, but with this urban setting and this big business storyline. I mean, she uses metaphors that are grotesque throughout the book. She's an artist of the grotesque, at least in this novel, which is the only one I've read. The central imagery of the book has to do with the horror and longing inspired by the maternal body.
It's true, and she actually uses very similar language to describe her own mother in the autobiography.
What? Was her mother...
gigantic mountainous bosoms?
Really?
Yeah. So
really?
That's her mom she's talking about.
Did you notice towards the end of the book that all of a sudden there's a metaphor where I think it's Central Park develops nursing breasts? This is the kind of thing we're talking about. Like, it's fucking surrealism.
Yeah.
But it's not intentional. It's just pouring out of her mind. Like, Poe is an analog.
I think it is intentional. Let's not go so far as to say that she is not a thinking artist.
No, I mean, it's not precious, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, definitely not. She's just throwing it out there, and she knows the public will read anything she writes. She says in her autobiography, nobody edited what she did. They just let her do whatever she wanted.
They sure didn't, because her paragraph-long sentences are as complex as Henry James's, but they're also not as controlled as Henry James's.
Yeah.
They go off the rails. The grammar is shaky.
Sure, but this is every writer's dream. Just barge in there, do whatever you want. Everyone loves it. You become a millionaire and you get to do exactly what you want. No compromise.
And there's no cynicism. Like, these stories mean something to her. They are personal.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about the plot. If you've only seen the 2 films, then you don't know this book. So that's what we have to do first. We have to talk about what happens in this book. We've talked a bit already about how it's written, but let's talk about what happens in it.
Okay, but just very briefly to fill in the blank a little bit here. Fannie Hurst grew up, as we said, in Missouri, child of shabby middle class.
That's going too far. They were not shabby middle class. They had some financial turbulence, but they had a servant.
Yeah, well, everybody had a servant.
No, that's not true. They had a servant. They were able to send their daughter to college. That's not shabby. Yes, they did have to live in boarding houses sometimes.
A lot, apparently. Yeah. A lot. All I'm saying is that if you say middle class, you might picture the life of Jane Wyman in All That Heaven Allows. So it wasn't like that.
No, of course not. They were also in a very strange position in American society because they were assimilated German Jews. Both of her parents were born in the United States. Their parents had come from Germany. The Jewish faith was very important to them. However, they didn't feel any solidarity with anyone that came from any other wave of immigration. So you could only basically marry someone who was also a German Jew who had come before the Civil War, basically. If anyone that came in the late 19th century were just targets for horrifying anti-Semitic language coming right from her own parents. So that's what Fannie Hurst grew up with.
So she definitely experienced a form of identity shame, though not much like the one that's in Imitation of Life.
Of course, nothing in America is as horrifically troubling as trying to navigate the black-white divide. That is the most dangerous position to be in. But obviously, Fannie Hurst did know something about an analogous situation of degrees of assimilation, a nerve-wracking way to live.
Yeah, that's interesting because of the way that a lot of critics around the 30s and 40s are talking, like Lionel Trilling, are talking like there are no social classes in America. There's not enough society in America to sustain the writing of traditional novels.
Well, that's what Henry James said.
Well, okay, then Lionel Trilling is getting that from Henry James.
Sure.
We'll continue to think about that. Eventually, young Fannie moves to New York and becomes very interested. Does she say exactly when she becomes interested in the plight of the poor and immigrants, other marginalized people?
So she was always interested in the writing life and the intellectual life, and she says very pointedly that she did not think at all about prejudice in America. She did not really think much about class stratification in America while she was growing up, or even when she was in college. She said just really didn't come up much. However, she does mix in some stories that gainsay that. She did take some jobs at factories that her dad enabled her to get. These were business colleagues, and then she wrote articles about how people were being mistreated, thus getting her dad into all kinds of trouble for having her infiltrate and spy on his Confederates. Obviously, that was something that was starting to become an interest for her even before she left St. Louis, but her dream was always to get away, go to New York. That's where you had to be to really make it as a writer. Her parents were unbelievably, or anyway, her mother especially, was unbelievably resistant to this, tried everything to get her to stay at home and get married and live next door. Very strange, troubling mother-daughter relationship there that you could certainly see some echoes of in Imitation of Life.
Cool. Not surprising.
No, this is something that really comes out of her own experience, and it's transmuted into the big business context and into the
racial
prejudice context.
Yeah.
She does finally get away.
She becomes interested initially in writing about Lower East Side.
At first, she said she was focusing on the wonderful success stories, people going to night school and working their way out of that class. And then she was like, actually, when I started to think about it, I realized that 99.9% of these people were not escaping this life, and maybe that's the interesting thing, not the weird one-off success stories.
Although she does write about those, or at least those are the things that get made into movies, those stories of
right.
hers. Another thing that she starts taking on is this idea of very marginalized women, like the mistresses. The mistress that she writes about in Backstreet, but she had earlier stories writing about women like that as well that were apparently even more depressing. Marginalized or transgressive sexuality and its impact based on gender is something else that interests her. And that's kind of unusual for anyone to be writing about.
She writes a lot about how she felt marginalized in other ways, writes very frankly about her body issues. She was very unhappy with her weight. It affected her life in innumerable ways.
It's possible that what inspired her, what occasioned her to start writing about the Black experience was that she developed a friendship with Zora Neale Hurston.
Who doesn't get mentioned at all in the autobiography, which is bizarre.
A weird omission. Yes, apparently Fannie turns up in Zora's autobiography, but not vice versa. That's almost an omission that must mean something.
Yeah, I would think so.
But we don't know what, because we don't know enough about Fannie, even after all this. Fannie got involved in all sorts of politics as she became more famous as a writer. New Deal politics, in particular, though that would be, I guess, after.
In 1933. So as she was writing Imitation of Life, she was also hanging out with the Roosevelts.
Yeah, she became good friends with Eleanor.
Yeah.
And she starts associating with figures from the Harlem Renaissance, and she judged a short story contest, and Zora won the prize, and they became friends.
But that happened in the 20s, right?
So that was ages before.
Well, not ages, but a few years before this, yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess, okay, so it's only 1933, yeah.
Yeah.
She employed her, and they went on road trips together. Zora was employed as her chauffeur, and they went on these trips together. They went on a trip to Canada, and this got her thinking about, I guess the maple syrup made her start thinking about the story for Imitation of Life.
Yeah, she had an unconventional marriage, too.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to her avant-garde private life, but yes, she did marry a Jew, I guess, that her parents did not approve of.
No, her father never said his name. Jacques Danielson.
He was what, a concert pianist?
He was a pianist, and he was involved in the music world. He didn't really want to be a front and center concert pianist. He had a kind of stage fright that dogged him his whole life. So he was more involved in assisting other people in the music world and teaching and that kind of thing.
Was he like Oscar Levant in Humoresque?
No. He sounds she makes him sound wonderful. The book was written just a couple of years after his death. A lot of the book is just about how much she loved this guy.
So their marriage was secret, although the press found it out. She kept her own name. They lived apart.
In the book, she says that that's not really true, except at the beginning.
So she later changed her name?
No, she never changed her name, but they didn't have separate residences for the whole 30 or 40 years of their marriage.
Well, Wikipedia does say that she also had an affair with an explorer while they were married, so it was somewhat of an open relationship, but it did almost end the marriage, but ultimately the marriage survived.
Imitation of Life. Stuff gets shuffled in there 100 pages before it becomes important.
Yeah, she jumps ahead.
Yeah.
And then she catches us up with all this stuff that's been happening while her character was thinking about something else.
It's wonderful. It works really well for me. It's crazy, though. This is not how anyone would be told to write for popular magazines.
I also love how 90% of it is free and direct speech, except when Delilah talks, because Delilah talks quite a bit at various points. But every now and then she just starts talking her character just starts talking in the first person. I actually did that in my novel, unless I decided to edit that out, but I was like, ooh, this is daring.
Yeah.
This is so daring. I'm switching to the first person. Ooh.
Yeah.
So that's what Fannie just does what she wants.
She does. All right, now let's zero in and talk about what actually happens in this novel.
So it starts, not surprisingly, considering what we've been saying, with the death of a mother.
It does.
And a discussion of the mother's body, specifically the desexualization of her body.
Laid out.
She starts going on about how her mother, the idea is that her mother was disembodied in life, and now she's just a body.
Yeah, it took death to make her a real incorporated being.
Right away, we get this dichotomy of the mother is the body that gravitationally pulls you back to it, but on the other hand, there is this repressed sexuality being inherited from her white mother.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We're in Atlantic City. B. Pullman, well, B is our protagonist.
B-E-A.
Yep. She lives with her father and a roomer who's been there for many, many years throughout the period of her youth. Once the mother dies, well, it's time that they figure out how to keep her in the house and just fill in for the mother.
She initially starts thinking very nervously. Within her own mind, she is a very timid and self-doubting person who feels incompetent at most things, though not business. She starts thinking to herself about how she could never take her mother's place in running a household, but ultimately...
That's what they want her to do.
But not only that, but she is more afraid of going out to work. She would rather be running a household, even though she feels inadequate at it compared to her mother, than becoming a working girl. This is where the image of the kennel first turns up. This animal rooting for warmth and comfort and security, which is all she wants out of life, she tells us hundreds of times.
Yeah, well, she feels like that is her ultimate telos, to provide that space for people.
Well, only because she is unable to get it for herself, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Both her father and this boarder work for the great pickle and relish firm, which is definitely Heinz, right? Her father is some kind of local representative, and the boarder, Stephen Pullman, he is a salesman who works on the boardwalk and gives lectures about the life history of a tomato, from the vine to the bottle, other such discourses which keep the ketchup moving.
The next disaster that befalls the household, she gets married She gets married before or after the stroke? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, after. Stroke happens after. Her dad pressures her into marrying Stephen. Basically, we're all three living here, and it's time for you to step into your mother's place. But
Well,
you won't be having sex with me, instead you'll be having sex with the other guy.
Well, yeah, he makes it seem like it's indecent for two men to be living with a
So someone's got to marry her.
growing girl without her being married to somebody.
Yeah, the dad can't marry her, so Stephen has to. She has no interest in Stephen. In the Fannie Hurst autobiography, she discusses a gentleman caller who was around for, seems like a long time. No time periods are well delineated in that book, but he courted her for quite a while, and he also gave terrible, unsophisticated lectures on Abraham Lincoln at local women's groups and things like that. So it's the same guy. This is a guy that she really didn't like from her real life, and this is Stephen Pullman that her protagonist is forced to marry.
But like I said, Bea has this dream that she's going to be established in a middle-class household, she's going to be financially secure, and she's not going to have to face the real world, and that's what she wants, so she marries this guy.
Yeah, she goes along with it. Nobody twists her arm. She just is like, okay, Dad, I guess that makes sense. I'll marry this guy.
Then the next terrible thing that befalls their household is that the father has a stroke, which transmogrifies him from a
dandy.
A dandy for whom she feels a sort of distant affection into a horrifying Kafkaesque nightmare of a grotesque, whose only pleasure in life is to beat her with a cane. He develops an intense animosity towards his daughter in particular, and no one else.
Well, he's very fastidious, and if anything is not done to his satisfaction, he can't do it himself anymore, so he lashes out.
Only at her.
Sure, he blames her. Stephen hates this guy at this point. They were good friends until this befell the dad, but now Stephen is like, just get him out of my sight. I can't stand looking at this. Stephen has another business on the side. He also sells maple syrup. This will become important later, but all is not well already in the household. Bea becomes pregnant. She's basically going to be stuck in this life, taking care of her dad and ministering to her husband, who she has no interest in. She must submit to his animal desires, and the descriptions of their sex life is just grim.
Yeah, she has had no personal sexual awakening herself as a result of meeting this man, so yeah, she just thinks of desire as something that the men have, which I think there was kind of a communication with her mother once to that effect as well. No, with the neighbor.
Yeah.
The neighbor basically gives her the advice without saying so to fake orgasms. If you're going to be one of the frigid ones, she says, something like that. If you're going to be one of the frigid ones, I advise you to at least make him think he's doing a good job. It'll go easier on you.
Also, we don't get the sense that he cares either way, right? He's a guy, he does his thing all day, and every once in a while he transforms into a sex-crazed loon who has to have some interaction with her. Like, she talks about how, like, she just can't believe it. He turns into something else.
And the very first appearance, I think, or significant appearance of a black person in the narrative is this girl who comes over to help with the cleaning, and I think on their wedding night decides to mischievously reveal to be that
he's got porn.
Yeah, he's got pictures of undressing women hidden in his room where they're now going to stay together. And so, of course, it serves the purpose of this young black girl who's described as not being much more than a child, somehow mysteriously being more sexually knowledgeable than Bea and revealing this terrible truth.
Before she can suffer too much under this regime, Stephen takes a business trip and dies in a train crash.
Ironically, given his name.
Yes.
Which turns out to be advantageous.
Yeah, well, the Pullman name will really play a large part in the book. This throws Bea into a really difficult position. She can't just keep running a household because there's no money coming in. Her dad is a dependent. Her new baby is a dependent. All she can think of to do is try to keep Stephen's maple syrup business going because he's been dealing via the mail with a Vermont maple syrup firm, and they keep sending maple syrup, and if she just keeps peddling it and keeps invoicing them, then they can keep this going. She signs everything B. Pullman.
Now, up to this point, her life hasn't looked very good to us, but she has thought it's fine enough. She's sort of been vacillating between her hazy dream of kennel warmth in this house and how eventually her husband's going to make enough money that they can get a nice house. And
yeah, on Ventnor.
Yeah, and she'll be raising her baby, and again, not having to face the world is a big bonus, and everything will be okay. But as soon as her husband dies, there's no way anything is ever going to be okay again, and she is thrown into a state of anxiety that lasts for the rest of the novel.
Pretty much, yeah. She does have a couple of neighbors that she can talk these things over with. You've already described her conversations with
one of them.
Yeah. There's the Italian grocer's wife, and yeah, the doctor's wife.
I'm not sure which one that was.
Are sounding boards occasionally for her, but really she's kind of on her own. She certainly can't talk about anything with her dad, even though he's right there, just staring at her throughout the entire novel.
So at this point, as a kind of savior, there materializes Delilah. Boy, does she materialize.
She pounds the pavement selling this maple syrup.
Oh, by the way, I don't comprehend this because she is described as being a weak, tiny little woman, and we sell cans of maple syrup at my place of business. I don't understand how she could be carrying more than at most 4 of these at a time. Your arms would fall off.
It says she has to keep running back and forth constantly, both because she has to keep checking on her dad and her baby, and because presumably, yeah, she can only carry a few of them at a time when she's trying to peddle them.
A nightmare.
Sure, they're heavy.
No, I just mean it's all a nightmare.
Yeah, it is. It's very bad. She realizes at a certain point maybe she should try to bring in someone to help her, someone that she can exploit financially.
Well, she gets those weird bohemian photographers, boarders, but they don't help that much.
No, and they don't even pay on time. Nope. They're not reliable. So a stopgap at best. What she really needs is someone that can take care of the house and be the wife while she goes out there and does things in the man's world.
Unlike the movie, the Stahl movie, which seems to be a contemporary setting, this 1933 novel is set during the World War I period.
Very important. Yeah. The book basically ends in 1933, but it's a long, long saga. The movie, I guess, must be doing that too, but it doesn't. We'll talk about that later. It doesn't seem like eras are passing in the movie. But in the book, yes, it's very temporally specific, actually.
So the context here for Delilah's background is, what do they call it?
The Great Migration.
The Great Migration, yeah.
So she's from the South. She's come up to Atlantic City, which is New Jersey, right, in their efforts to get away from the South. And there is a black neighborhood. B. Pullman visits the neighborhood looking for someone who will agree to her terms, which are not going to be very good. She can't pay much. She finds Delilah. Delilah hails her, actually.
I can't remember if in the book, as in the movies, she says that she just needs, it's hard to get a job and keep her child with her.
I don't think that she states it quite so propositionally in the book, but that seems to be the idea. Obviously, she's really good at what she does, and there are jobs for people with her skills, but her daughter is a drawback, so she doesn't have the same kind of bargaining power that she would if she was just on her own.
So Delilah is her mother rematerialized, but as an imagined other who a lot of unconscious stuff can be projected on about maternity and bodies, which is what the mammy stereotype itself is all about. And you can read more about that in academic articles and or the internet. I don't think it is for us to get into the question of, which was hotly debated between some of these Harlem Renaissance writers after the book was made into this very successful movie, of whether this character is realistic or not.
Oh, well, I think we can say no. I don't.
Well, but is any character, she is an artist of the grotesque.
Yeah.
Is any character in this book realistic? Is Virginia Eden realistic? Is this father realistic?
Well, certainly not after his stroke, anyway.
But Delilah is the most important character other than B.
She is a force of nature. She basically can do anything. She has a lot more knowledge about the world.
She is
than B.
everything that B is not. So
Right.
she is this hyper-competent mother, also a mother that is embodied.
Yeah, a mother that knows all about sex as well, is not shy about that either, although she's pretty much done with sex by the time we meet her.
So it's all very theoretical.
Right.
This body is not sexualized now in the time of the novel.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I feel like there's a kind of sexual component to B and Delilah's relationship.
Oh, yes, but it's not sexualized in the sense of for men.
That's all in the past.
Oh, yeah, no, the homoeroticism is strong.
Yeah.
Is crazy at points, like the death scene. Iskowitz talks about this novel being a female buddy novel version of the Leslie Fiedler theory about American literature and the special relationships that develop within it, special homoerotic relationships. Huck Finn and Jim, probably the most familiar example. Certainly there is nothing in Huckleberry Finn to suggest a powerful erotic bond between those characters, and here they're...
Well, no, what do you mean? Come back to the raft? I mean, that's the whole point, right? That's where Fiedler got...
So you disagree with me. You disagree. You think that that is in the writing? I've only read Huckleberry Finn once.
I'm not saying I think it's in the writing. I think Fiedler thinks it's in the
writing.
writing.
But you think it's in this writing. In this writing, it is there.
Yeah, well, they're both adults, for one thing.
When does that stop any writer?
Okay, but it just feels a little bit more plausible. You know, they could actually enter into a relationship at any time, and it would make sense.
Yeah, but they pretty much don't.
Well, no,
to.
they don't.
Like the father and daughter in Late Spring.
Right.
Don't even need sex.
They cobble a home together, and B is proving quite adept at navigating the little world of maple syrup sales in Atlantic City.
Now that she has someone to take care of all this other stuff that she apparently wanted to do, she keeps telling us, but has no aptitude for.
No. What she does have an aptitude for is business, yes. Yeah. More and more, she's starting to think, well, I've got to parlay this maple syrup into something more stable, something that can really grow.
And it turns out that Delilah, coming from the South, is an awesome cook, especially of waffles.
We get the miraculous notion, okay, maybe I failed at creating the kennel in the home, B thinks to herself, but how about we replicate that for the world on the boardwalk?
And what is going to say kennel for the world, for all of America, and then the globe beyond, more than a mammy presiding over your waffles?
A very homey restaurant, and the idea there with the Pullman name is to create this very cozy Pullman train car.
Yeah, that commemorates the death of her husband.
Right.
That's the crazy part.
It was kind of a heartwarming thing, ultimately, for that guy to go away. Certainly never consciously thought by our protagonist, but yeah, there's got to be something that she likes about trains. I think a lot of us have very cozy feelings about a dining car on a train, so it makes intuitive sense.
The kinds of misunderstandings that critics somehow develop about writing they know they're not supposed to like has some fascinating evidence in this introduction to Imitation of Life. So Iskowitz quotes a recent critic who says that Imitation of Life is little more than a tawdry bestseller celebrating the American success ethic, romantic love, and the nuclear family.
Crazy.
That's insane.
That doesn't sound like someone that read the book.
There's no romantic love. The American success ethic is raked over the coals. And let's start by talking about the nuclear family. So Delilah, this figure of excess and abundance, that's how she is imagined, she completely upends, like she's helpless to do anything about America's racial hierarchy.
We all are, unfortunately.
But she completely upends the patriarchal household.
Yeah.
She refers to the old gentleman,
my chair baby,
as her chair baby for the entirety of the novel, and threatens to spank him and like all kinds of things. Just talk to him in ways that would be unimaginable for a white woman to talk to the patriarch of the household, let alone the black servant. She is also, in contrast, for reasons we'll discuss, to the Delilah figures in the movies, entirely conscious of racism and vocal about it.
This is one thing I want to slow down here and talk about in depth. Delilah has a very fully articulated theological understanding of race in America.
If there are only fragments in the movie.
We'll talk about how the movies approach this, but in the book, it's very clear what is going on. Delilah has thought all of this out. She is a very fervently believing Christian. God has set things up this way, specifically to place his chosen people, which would be black people in America, in the most terrible situation possible as some kind of a test, right?
Is this not Uncle Tom theology, though?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's definitely the Old Testament understanding of the people who are captives in Egypt. Now, she's really thought through all the implications of this. This is not something that she repeats unthinkingly. Delilah is a really sharp character and is not shy about explaining any of this.
Did you catch that at one point she refers to God as being black?
Blackness comes with terrible responsibilities, which is to just suffer and suffer and suffer in this world that doesn't matter. Then the world that matters, the rewards will be great. This is in the movies too, but in the book it's a lot more clear why it's so important to her.
To have the funeral.
The funeral that she wants is the equivalent of basically becoming the president of a multinational corporation, right? They move from Atlantic City at a certain point to New York. This is where the black intelligentsia began to congregate. This is where the Harlem Renaissance took shape. She is not a member of that community, but she makes an incredible splash there by making huge donations all over town. That's not really in the movies at all, but we'll just stick to the book here. She does use the funds that they are getting together to make an impression financially. When she does die, again, that is the moment of the world's acknowledgement of her greatness. Yeah.
But on earth as well as in heaven.
Easily see someone who was confronted with the racial system in America. This is as good a way as any to try to make sense of it, right? Like to hope it's going to change or to think that there are still opportunities or whatever. No, Delilah is saying there are no opportunities. This is just a hell. We have to make it through it and get to the good part, which is heaven.
Iskevitz talks about Sterling Brown, Harlem Renaissance poet and Harvard professor, and his very famous critique of Imitation of Life. And I have found passages from it quoted in various essays. I wasn't able to find the essay itself, so my understanding of it is limited because these quotes are being pulled out of context. However, one thing Brown says, he's talking about Delilah as a mammy stereotype or archetype. He talks about her being almost content, something like being almost content in her submission. She has submitted because she thinks that white supremacy is so virulent that there is, and powerful, that there is no way to fight it.
And it's not only that, it's that she thinks God set it up this way. And these white people that are bothering her and making her life a hell, they are put there by God just to be devils. The most important thing is that she is more ambitious than B, I think, in a lot of ways. And what she is ambitious for is to have the greatest funeral, the greatest send-off from this charnel house that you can possibly get, and she succeeds.
But the book's understanding of Christianity, I thought, was fascinating in that it is openly presenting it as a system of rationalization and compensation for social ills.
Yeah, well, it's Gnosticism, basically.
How do you say that?
Well, that the world is hell, and the best thing you can do is get out of it. That's where spiritual striving should be leading you, right?
So there's a sort of parallel in the novel between Delilah's desire. She wants nothing on earth for herself, and that's why she continues to be the servant, even once they're making unimaginable oodles of money. Nothing for herself except this goal of the funeral, whereas B delusionally, it's always clear that it's a delusion, thinks that there is going to come a time where all of her work is going to be poured into this ideal home, which she's been dreaming of ever since the train accident, or before the train accident, when she was anticipating having her child.
Yeah, when she thought she'd have to share it with Stephen.
Now that she's got all this money, the home just keeps... Like, there's so much prose devoted to her shifting ideas of this perfect home because she has the money to make it anything she wants it to be, right? So she can never settle on what's going to be the perfect thing, and it's constantly shifting.
But she is planning on getting it ready for her daughter when she emerges from
But she thinks that her goal of ideal happiness is going to be realizable on Earth through money.
Oh, yeah, of
And that's
course.
what Delilah understands, because Delilah understands that although the black condition in America makes it much more apparent, makes them like paradigmatic of this hell situation, she understands that life is hell for everyone. That is the novel's conclusion. The novel ends on a note of hell.
Yeah.
I've never seen a novel end this way ever, where the character is left with nothing and no hope.
The way Delilah would see it is that whites they don't even see that they are satanic. They don't see that they're not really important to God. They're just there as obstacles to Delilah, and they're tempted by all kinds of things. They think that the world that they're living in has some importance. Delilah obviously doesn't even need to be worried about that stuff. And that's what she's terrified about for Peola, because Peola is in a position where she might get tempted.
Because she's a bit white.
So she might get pulled onto that side of the line, which...
Because it's all discussed in terms of demonic possession, and the imagery is that of demonic possession. Peola has been possessed by the demon of whiteness. She's
the white
frothing,
horses in her blood.
Yeah, that Sterling Brown could only laugh at because the imagery is so uncontrolled. But yeah, these are scenes of trauma and hysteria, of the novel just coming apart at the seams whenever Peola has one of her encounters with racism. It's like she's having an epileptic fit.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Again, the book is all stream of consciousness through B's mind.
But
Delilah makes a strong impression.
Exactly.
But it's not through her mind. So we are getting things at a remove. It's just Delilah is so powerfully etched that, she stays with you. But again, we're not seeing the world through her mind, but we're getting her words, and her words really create a picture of what she thinks the world is like. Now, that Peola scene where they discover at school that she's been passing for white because Delilah visits her.
The first scene is the chapter 26. It is so painful that I remember the chapter. Chapter 26, Jessie calls her the N-word.
Yeah.
Because she's picked it up in the park.
Yeah.
And then the N-word is thrown around like 30 times in the chapter.
By Delilah.
By Delilah. And by Peola. That's the first scene of demonic frenzy in the household. That's just shaking the household to its core. Wow. That was quite a chapter in a lot of ways.
But think about the scene.
But then the next scene like that is where she's been passing.
The impact upon her is she's catatonic afterwards, and a doctor is summoned. This is like one of the most intense scenes in the book.
Well, doctor is summoned. This is the only time we actually witness her, other than Jessie calling her the N-word, where we actually witness racism happening to her, and it's kind of all you need.
Yeah, it really says it all, right? The doctor shows up at their house. He sees them as a well-to-do family with a maid and 2 daughters, right?
2 white daughters.
Right. So he takes a look at Peola and he says, this child is in terrible shape. She needs special care. You have to pull her out of school, get a special tutor for her, handle this person with kid gloves, or else she's not going to make it in this world. And then, after going through all of that, he's talking about, how they're going to make arrangements. He'll keep making follow-up visits to see how she's doing.
And I'm going to give her a special foot bath or something.
Yeah. Then he finds out that, actually, no, Delilah's the mother. And he just says, oh, throw her in bed. She'll be fine tomorrow, whatever, fuck off. I can't believe I'm here. Right? It's really insane, but brilliant, actually, the way
idea
that's done.
That on the one hand, if Peola is black, she doesn't matter, number one. But number two, also that somehow she's more resilient.
He doesn't even care about that.
You don't think so? That's not even there.
No, he just doesn't care. He doesn't care about this person anymore as soon as he finds that out. And he certainly doesn't think, oh yeah, well, special treatment's required. No, he's like, no, that's for rich white kids, right? They get a special tutor, private school, or whatever they need. Anyone else who's having trouble as a child, well, let them die. That's basically this guy's attitude. What an awful doctor. But yeah, a brilliant portrayal of something that you could certainly easily believe happening. So yeah, Peola, she is viewed at quite a remove in the book. But her situation, the book doesn't ever let you forget about what's going on with Peola, but you don't get a lot of direct evidence of what Peola is thinking most of the time. But we know that she's suffering, and she is trying to navigate this unnavigable world that she's been thrown into.
Where even to go with this, because like I said, there's no plot.
It's just basically an onward and upward kind of narrative. In terms of the business, it just keeps expanding.
And Delilah keeps expanding. Till she cannot move anymore. This body just gets more and more out of control. Where you can see, as I was saying, not only the relationship to the maternal body, but Fannie Hurst's own relationship to the maternal body going on within her own body. There's like fat phobia, like crazy, and yet also a kind of joy in this expanding flesh, a sort of sensual pleasure in it.
In her autobiography as well, on the one hand, obviously she feels like, no, this body is going to get you into trouble in this world because of the regime under which women are living. But on the other hand, there's something joyous about being healthy rather than starving yourself.
There's also a lot of talk, this weight issue comes up with B too, and all the talk about her corsets in relation to her romantic life. Yeah,
so B, she does eventually acquire a love interest. Now we should talk a bit about, again...
Flake! Yeah. Flake, Frank, Flake!
Flake gets referenced 100 pages before you really figure out who the hell this is. The narrator just mentions this name, and you kind of file it away for later.
Now, it turns out that he is one of the many important to social setting and novel thematics.
The World War I aspect.
The boys who make this, who she thinks that the biggest components of her success, other than her own business acumen, are Delilah and the boys. The boys and Delilah are like together in her mind as this image of American suffering. Yeah. And Delilah becomes the mother particularly to these boys.
Yes.
And then this is obviously an idealized imagining of how this relationship would work.
The success is definitely chalked up to the homey atmosphere, the club atmosphere that is created. All of these people that are displaced by the war, they're going to boot camp, then they're being sent to New York, and then they're waiting to be shipped out to Europe to possibly die. And while they're en route, they all meet up at these B. Pullman restaurants, and they also have letters sent to them there. So it becomes like a post office box for these people. B actually encourages this and makes it into a kind of a credo for the organization that we're going to do this. We're going to facilitate.
You know what I just realized the B. Pullmans are?
What?
Wombs.
Sure. And we do get a few named boys, including Alan Matterhorn, and Flake is one of them as well. Now, Flake is a guy that wanted to be a doctor. But
he just gets sucked into the business vacuum of B. Pullman.
Well, he was displaced by the war, right? So he goes off to Europe and fights and has terrible traumatic experiences. He distinguishes himself in battle, but he says that he was terrified the whole time, and basically one of the things that held him together was the memory of this kennel, of this womb. And when he comes back, yes, he does get brought into the orbit of B and Delilah. It turns out that he has a lot of interesting ideas to contribute, or anyway, organizational skills to contribute to this ever-expanding company or corporation. So she's like the genius. B. Pullman is the...
Oh yeah, and he refers to her constantly as a genius.
You know, his function is he's just there to try to keep all the ideas in order and do the paperwork to try to keep up with the genius trail she's blazing across America.
There are long stretches of this novel that I kept thinking this could be written by Ayn Rand. It's such a celebration of entrepreneurial genius. Except I don't think Rand ever writes about women business geniuses, does she?
I'm not a big Ayn Rand reader, but I don't think so in the experiences. Her female characters are usually worshipping men who do things.
And then she meets the insane, crazy, grotesque Virginia Eden.
Yes.
The beauty products self-made millionaire.
They're part of an expanding club of women who are joining the ranks of the CEOs and presidents of companies.
And gives her this idea to invest in real estate that involves displacing a ton of poor people from their slums so it can be turned into a neighborhood for the ultra wealthy, which is hilarious because no one in the whole novel has a single twinge of conscience about this, and yet Fannie Hurst was in charge of FDR's housing committee.
Yeah, well, I think she was thinking about that, actually. She talks about that in her novel, too, that she had made investments and she actually owned properties, which her husband pointed out, like, have you looked at these properties? These are really fucked up buildings. I think you better sell them if you want to become part of the New Deal. So she's like, he saved me from a scandal because any of those buildings could have gone up in flames at any time. I didn't really think about them, but yeah, he noticed that really I shouldn't be involved with this. So maybe that was on her mind in 1933 when she wrote this. But yeah, it's a disgusting gentrification project.
She is very personally generous. We hear a lot about that, but she is, like, to her employees and such.
And worshipped.
Yeah, they get crushes on her. That's discussed. But she doesn't think about politics, ever.
No.
She has no politics, particularly has never thought about feminism, so she's not much like her creator.
No, of course not. As the business continues to expand, the kids keep growing up. They're basically adults by the time we get to 1933.
But the novel has us believe that she has never had a relationship with her daughter.
No, she's been too busy.
Kind.
Well, her daughter's been away at boarding school a lot of the time. She's been in Switzerland, all kinds of things like this, right? So, which is not uncommon for wealthy parents.
There's just an extraordinary amount of ambivalence within these mother-daughter relationships. She can't get her daughter to come near her when she's a child because already she's been alienated from her mother working all the time. But the novel, like, never relents in this at all.
No.
Unlike the movies.
Right.
The novel is so much stranger than the movies you would never believe.
It's very bleak. Piola continues also to have the same difficulties. She is caught in this terrible situation that really has no good answer. She agrees to go off and study at a college, a historically black college, but she winds up getting a job as a librarian after that. She writes letters home. She's in Seattle. She kind of lets it be understood that things are going great for her, right? And she doesn't really talk about how she's been living her life until we will want to move to the end of the novel here. So
yeah, we're almost there.
Piola makes a decision that she wants to marry a man that she will only give his initials, AM.
She has sterilized herself so that she will never be given away.
So again, Piola is thinking several steps ahead, anticipating any objections anyone might have, and she's done the only thing that she can think of to do in order to achieve her goals. So yeah, she can't have kids because if the kids give away her genetic heritage, then she's just assuming this man that she loves will leave her and hate her.
The boy has no parents. He is a war veteran. His hand has been damaged.
Yeah, and it does sound like Delilah is right when she's had this feeling about Alan Matterhorn.
Yeah.
That it really is Alan Matterhorn.
But she thinks that it spells doom for both of them.
Absolutely, she does. What Piola wants to do is go away to South America. Her husband has a job as an engineer in Bolivia, I believe it was. And she's never coming back. She's never going to acknowledge her mother again. And she's just going to pass.
To me, the fact that she can't have children and neither of them have parents and they're going to live way out in
another country,
it makes me wonder what passing is doing for her at this point. It's clearer what it's doing for the characters in the movies.
No, Piola is very distant at the end of this. Her plight becomes...
It may just be like mental illness at this point. Like, she's just...
Well, no, her husband will not marry her. She makes that pretty clear. Even though if this is Alan Matterhorn, he thinks of Delilah as his mother, he loves her, he will not marry her if he knows...
No, but I'm saying, what social advantages is this going to bring her?
Well, she doesn't say that it's going to bring her social advantages. She says she's in love with this guy.
All right.
And he has a good job, right? So they'll be living very well in Bolivia, clearly.
Well, we'll discuss this more more when we talk about some of the reception of the movie.
Sure.
This question of why passing, under what circumstances.
No, I agree. I think the movies do this better in a lot of ways, but the book does it in the bleakest way possible because Piola just writes herself out of the story at this point, and she's gone. She never comes back.
Nope.
If you've only seen the movies, you really are waiting for this moment where Piola returns, and no, she does not return.
There's an empty seat for her in the car at the funeral, but she doesn't fill it.
She does not. And you keep thinking, of course, she's going to see the news stories about it, right? The book really teases you with that. It does give you cause to think, okay, Piola's going to find out about this in Bolivia and make it back for the funeral. But she doesn't.
Yeah, it's a global news story, Delilah's death.
And you'd think if it is Alan Matterhorn that's the husband, he would be affected by it and he would tell Piola about it. Did you see this news story?
Maybe they're in the crowd.
Maybe they are, but the book does not tell us that. So we never get any catharsis on that front.
And we get even less catharsis in the other plot line.
Right. So our incredibly successful businesswoman, what she wants to do at the end of this book is marry Frank Flake, this younger man that she has fallen in love with.
8 years younger. And she's about 40 at this point.
Right. She keeps telling herself, we're both in our 30s, 39 and 31 or whatever. That gets repeated over and over again.
But
it's
she's
like
never...
her rationalizations for why he might actually... But he does love her in a way, but he thinks of her too worshipfully. The book never really makes you think he understands what her feelings about him are.
Well, ultimately he does. And it looks like he might be reciprocating, but then the daughter shows up, and the daughter keeps talking about how now that her mother is more human, because this love has humanized her, now they can get along, and she's not herself so in awe of this mother anymore. She herself is very modest, humble. She just describes herself, she's very likable. She describes herself as basically, I'm the daughter of a rich person. I have no aptitude or urge to do anything interesting in my life. I just want to
get married.
Happy and rich.
Yeah.
Enjoy myself. So these two people find each other, and my sense is that Flake is emasculated by his boss. Notably, the happier romantic outcomes in the movies, it's not a younger man. Well, it is in the Sirk movie, a younger man, but he's not her employee. And that's important.
Oh, I think it is.
She's not a business type. Like,
Flake sucks anyway. I hate this guy.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And this is what the Sirk movie teases out so nicely as a sort of alternate universe ending, because the way she's thinking about all of this is like she is moving people like chess pieces on a board. There are dolls that she has imagined more than actually had relationships with, both her daughter and this Flake, and she's just going to maneuver them into this dollhouse that she's building, and they're all going to live there happily ever after. With Delilah, ideally, but then Delilah dies.
Yeah.
Delilah has to die because she can't form an erotic attachment while Delilah is still alive, because that was her primary partner.
Right.
And the mind-blowing scene of Delilah's death, where she's described in a million different ways as a giant whale.
She's got a Song of Bernadette tumor growing.
Yeah, she has an enormous tumor growing on her body.
So again, Delilah comes across here as a suffering saint.
She is in the middle of the night. Yeah, this all reminds me of grotesque Kafka surrealism. So she's dragging herself around the house like the Gregor Samsa bug in the middle of the night, wailing and shrieking. And B has been having nightmares of this happening, but this is the first time it's penetrated her consciousness that it really is happening.
Yeah, she's wailing every night. Her best friend is suffering horribly.
So it's kind of like a nightmare that B had has now materialized in the living room. She dies kissing B's feet in what I can only process as a kind of erotic fulfillment for the two of them.
It's very disturbing stuff. The funeral occurs. It does go off as Delilah had hoped. Everybody takes notice of her. All of the prominent people in Harlem know of her passing, and she has ascended to these heights, and she'll be going even further.
I think you're right. I was trying to, at the end of this, think, what meaning does this novel have? I think you're right. It's just a Gnostic vision of hell.
Yeah.
American business world is hell, the American imagination of family happiness is hell, and the American experience of being black is hell.
Yes, and probably the most hellish of all, but there is some stiff competition from the others. And yes, the last thing is that B is So she's been pondering retirement for quite a while. The last part of the book is about how she's going to divest herself of her holdings, make an absolute killing, and then retire to this kennel on the riverfront in this incredible block of wealthy houses. It's foreshadowed long, long before the end, because we're told that at a certain point she writes a letter when her father dies. She writes a letter from Finland.
Right.
So that's like 100 pages, 200 pages before the end. We're told that she does go to this place, that she's not intending to go because she's going to quit. So if you've remembered that, then you know, okay, something's going to happen. She's not going to quit. She's just going to be driven on and on and on.
Yeah, so the author knows the doom is coming the whole time.
And the reader knows, too. She is going to be setting up these bee Pullmans in Finland. That means she's not getting married. She's never going to be happy. Everything's just going to be this endless quest to grow the bee Pullman business as a gigantic tumor across the world.
But I guess, she is providing happiness for other people, so that's good.
Right, it is a tumor with some secondary benefits for others, but none for herself.
None at all.
As long as she's working at this, she is miserable, and that's going to be her lot for the rest of her life.
But is kind of how business works, right?
And
you have to be endlessly doing more and more and more and expanding more and more and more, and there is no end to it.
No, it's like Faust. And it's the same actually for Delilah, right? She has made life comfortable for everybody else while suffering in the hell that she's been placed in, and her only release is death.
So Itzkovitz talks about this novel in much more containable terms as the ending signifying that B is being punished.
Yeah, I don't think
that's right. Being punished for not being a good mother because she's too ambitious. Number one, B is not ambitious. She's being driven by something, a demonic force beyond her. And by anxiety, actually, which is very acute summary of why Americans work themselves to death. She's not ambitious, and also we actually have, what's-her-face, Virginia Eden, there to show us that a wealthy woman can have it all.
Sure.
She doesn't have children, but she has sex. She has a sex life. She enjoys her life. Like, B talks about that all of the time. She enjoys her business, and she enjoys her life. But that's just not on the table for B.
I don't see why you would think she's being punished, right? As if Fannie Hurst is saying this is a bad person. This is definitely not a bad person. This is someone that the author cares about.
That all melodrama has these formulas that are about rewarding or punishing women.
Yeah. And obviously Fannie Hurst, I don't think, is writing in that vein. She's doing something totally different. She's doing something very distressing.
But people loved it. Okay, well, now we need to start talking about how and why the movies are different.
We could talk forever about that book, probably, but we should move on now to John M. Stahl's adaptation from 1934. We've got Claudette Colbert as Bee Pullman, Louise Beavers as Delilah, Freddie Washington as Peola, Rochelle Hudson plays Jessie, the daughter, and Warren William, a favorite of mine, plays a character invented for the movie. Ned Sparks, another favorite of mine, plays another character invented for the movie.
The screenwriter is William Hurlbut, who is just a general universal screenwriter at the time, does adaptations and screenplays and other bits of writing. His other most striking screenplay, perhaps, that's attributed to him would be probably The Bride of Frankenstein.
This film famously had a huge number of screenwriters, including Preston Sturges.
Which you can see. You can actually see, this is his ichthyologist bit that he uses again later in The Lady Eve with Warren
Well, that's
William.
an ophiologist.
Well, yeah, it's the same joke, though.
Yeah,
I'm
scientist.
I'm not quite civilized. So there's like some romantic comedy that gets into this movie.
Oh, it's so good.
Certainly not present in the novel.
No. Sturges, definitely you can feel him in this movie, and that's not only because the first time I saw this movie was because it was made available on VHS in the early 90s, I believe. Anyway, that's when I bought it as part of a Preston Sturges collection. So they were marketing it that way.
Strange.
But certainly he was not alone, and he was not credited on it. You want to talk about the context of the adaptation and the reception before we move into the actual movie, right?
Well, I just wanted to talk about some of the changes that were made to the novel on the basis of
the Brain Office.
Fear, on the basis of censorship. Fear fear of how white audiences would react, and also fear of how black audiences would react, and black leaders, because the NAACP was at this point able to exert pressure on motion pictures. I found it interesting to contemplate how the very popular novel could get away with doing some of the things that I talked about, but a movie could not.
Well, novels can do whatever they want. There's no industry-wide standard for censorship.
No, but why wouldn't they be feeling the pressure of the NAACP? Now, I assume that that group was looking at movies primarily because they had been formed, hadn't they, in response to Birth of a Nation?
Well, that was they were formed before Birth of a Nation, but it was one of the early issues that really became a frontline struggle for the organization.
Just talk about what that movie meant and why it became a big concern for black leaders.
Birth of a Nation was the biggest film made in America until Gone with the Wind. So it was a huge popular phenomenon, moneymaker. Everyone was seeing it across the country. And it is about the Civil War and the Reconstruction period from the point of view of a Klansman. The movie is based on novels written by Klansman Thomas Dixon. One of the novels is called The Klansman.
This movie had real social effects.
The Ku Klux Klan was revived because of that film. The Ku Klux Klan was a terrorist organization created during the Reconstruction period to stop black people from voting in the states that were being brought back into the United States only on the proviso that they would accept the amendment that made it illegal to bar people from voting based on race. They're a reactionary force trying to drive federal troops that were occupying the South out of those states and also resubjugate people who had been given some reason for hope that their lives might be about to change by Lincoln and Grant. They achieved their aim. Basically, by 1877, the federal government realized, or didn't realize, that makes it sound too much like a fait accompli. They just decided, we're just gonna pull all our troops out of the South and abandon all of the freed people down there to the tender mercies of the Ku Klux Klan and the Redeemers. That's what they called themselves. They wanted to reclaim the white power that they had always held. Yeah, they held it until the 1960s after that. So a horrifying period of time, which was celebrated by D.W. Griffith in that movie. And yeah, the Ku Klux Klan, dormant for 40 years, is reborn out of the enthusiasm that that film generated. It became a kind of a different organization, obviously, in 1915. It was sort of a catch-all, xenophobic, racist organization. A lot of its operations were carried out against Catholics in the Midwest and the North, but also certainly lots of lynchings were going on in the South and other parts of the nation. The movie itself, it has the heroic charge of the Ku Klux Klan. That's the climax. All the black characters in the film are played by people in blackface because no one would have played these characters as a black actor. They were so far beyond what anyone would accept doing.
So basically, black rights groups did not want this sort of shit to happen again.
Right.
So the reason that movies like Imitation of Life didn't get made every day, well, partly because books like this didn't get written every day, but Hollywood did not want to touch the quote-unquote race question at all. They, of course, could put black people in servile roles all of the time. That wasn't considered addressing the race question. Raising racism as an issue within a film had the potential to offend everyone, even black people, but mainly white people. So, first of all, the Breen office, for that reason, fought the use of the N-word.
Sure, that seems like a good idea.
The last N-words were removed from the script, specifically at the behest of Louise Beavers, and the NAACP got involved. I saw several sources seeing this. I don't know what the connection was, but I imagine that she asked them to intervene. It was taken out altogether. It does get back into the Sirk script, though.
Right.
There's one use.
Yeah, it's used by
a Nazi.
A demonic character.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for example, in the novel, in addition to that chapter I described, Delilah uses it a lot casually. She does explain within the novel that that's not the same thing as when a white person uses it.
No, when a white person uses it, it is
So
just
who
as bad
knows-
as we think it is today. But Delilah is using it because she has the right to use it as far as she's concerned.
So who knows how many uses or where were in the original script, but they're gone now.
Yeah.
And that does make one scene a little bit confusing where somebody in one of the essays I researched points out where Jessie calls Peola black, right? It has a different meaning than her calling her the N-word.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Different connotations, and the scene becomes a little more diffuse.
Right.
And less hysterical for that reason. But you can still get the gist of what's happening.
Well, it still hurts Peola because of her specific psychological context and sociological context, yeah.
Something I found very interesting in this research was, despite all the pressure on this question from the Breen office in this first year of the code, the original script included a lynching scene.
Really?
A lynching scene that I read an article, actually, let me get the name of that article. From social problem to maternal melodrama, the lost lynching scene in John M. Stahl's Imitation of Life by Kirsten M. Liu in Film History, Volume 30, Issue 4. She actually argues that she thinks it might have been intended as the final scene, or if not the final scene, then like a climactic scene, and that the funeral scene with Peola's return was written to replace it.
Really?
Peola's return specifically was written to replace it because the scene in question involves a black man flirting with Peola and her calling some white men to help her.
Oh my god.
Yeah, or just expressing annoyance, and some white men come along and start to lynch him, which causes her to recant and admit that she is black.
Wow.
So you can see how that could have been converted into her powerful final scene with her mother's coffin at the funeral.
Yeah.
And the whole essay talks about that conversion and what it means to the film and to the genre.
I mean, American popular culture was starting to come to grips with lynching at this time. You have As Thousands Cheer, the Irving Berlin musical, had Supper Time, the Ethel Waters number, which is about a woman waiting for her husband to return and he's not coming home because he's been lynched. So this was an immensely popular Broadway show.
But to actually introduce the element of lynching being a response to the idea of, or being excused by the idea that a white woman was being threatened.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
in a context where it's clear that no one was being threatened in that particular way is interesting. And also it puts her situation in a broader racial and political context than the mother-daughter relationship.
Yeah, it does.
The author assumes that what happened is that they knew this would never get past the Breen office, but it was there to be used as bargaining so that they could get other things in.
Sure, well, that's a big part of filmmaking under the code.
Now, what this shows us, though, is that contra Sterling Brown, who makes the Harvard professor's error of underestimating Hollywood movies, everything that is in there that looks like a conscious critique of racism in America is consciously there.
That's how it feels to me.
So the up and down staircase, famous up and down staircase scene.
A very carefully prepared image.
And all of the scenes where Peola or Delilah have to sit in the front, even though otherwise they are being treated as part of the family, the front of the car.
Oh, yeah.
Repeated imagery of that kind. As well as the invented for the film line that Delilah says early. The only time this Delilah is allowed to have any consciousness of racism, when they're showing the little girls talking about their schoolwork, and Claudette Colbert as B remarks that Peola is obviously smarter than Jessie, and Delilah replies, yes, we're all smart.
We all start out that way.
Yeah, it's just later we get done.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a wise Socratean irony.
Oh, yeah.
But her character is written in a way that's very inconsistent in the film, and the reason is that you can't have her constantly bringing up racism the way Delilah does in the novel, because that's just too contentious.
Yeah, and she certainly doesn't have the same kind of consistent theology. She says that she doesn't understand why the world is this way. It is this way. She doesn't make any bones about that. She says it can't be our Lord's fault. Now, in the book, Delilah thinks it is. The Lord has set things up up exactly this way as a test. That's not at all how Louise Beaver's version of Delilah sees things. She just thinks it's a fucking mess and doesn't know what to do about it. Doesn't know who's responsible for it.
Which is, less interesting as a character, but more, perhaps, realistic? I don't know, like, obviously, we were talking before about, I think, when we did Backstreet, about what Stahl brought to the melodrama, which is that he made melodramas that were very unmelodramatic.
Yeah, and this film is another case in point. Really, at the end, everything goes wild. But for a lot of it, there's some really incredibly distressing stuff going on, and the movie keeps a very steady hand on things.
The missing lynching scene, plus other evidence of communication with the Breen office about early drafts, suggests that what the screenwriters pulled out of this story that interested them was Paola's story. They wanted the movie to be Paola's story, and that was never going to happen.
No, but it does wind up...
Yeah, it focuses on her much more, keeps her in the forefront much more than the
book does.
Than the book, and that will be even more emphasized in the Sirk script. She becomes quite the anti-hero in the Sirk script.
Yeah, in the 1934 film, we have Freddie Washington, who gives an incredible performance, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, given all that's been excised from Delilah's character, what remains of the plot is the emotional power, generated from the performances of their scenes together. Because Delilah is a fully formed, intelligent human character when she interacts with her daughter. When she interacts with the white people, things go wonky.
And a lot of that is because she is following a script that has been hammered into her, I think.
Well, that's what you have to imagine if you're going to make sense of this movie's character.
Yeah, I don't think that you can take it to mean that Delilah isn't thinking about a lot of stuff behind the scenes that she can't bring up when she's talking, even with her best friend, Claudette Colbert. There's just too much of a gap there. They can only communicate in certain ways.
Which is, again, different than the novel, because despite all of Delilah's consciousness of racism in the novel, there doesn't seem to be that kind of barrier between her and B, maybe because they're just like two branches of the author's consciousness.
Character of B is very different in the movie. It's Claudette Colbert. She's a romantic comedy heroine.
She treats everybody with irony.
She is not this torn up, anxious person.
No, she's beautiful and confident throughout.
Right, so that's why, so many things change just based on it being Claudette Colbert, I think. Like, you could not have her lose her chosen mate to her daughter. Claudette Colbert is the one you would choose out of those two, obviously.
Although in this movie, she's not the older woman, and again, she's not his employer.
No.
So they've made it easier.
They've taken the character of Frank Flake entirely out of the movie. Instead, you've got Ned Sparks, who plays some of the role of Frank Flake in terms of being the business manager and administrator, but he's never a romantic possibility. Ned Sparks, the caustic Canadian, is often brought in for really good-natured, cranky guys.
Now, he is responsible for that absolutely confounding scene that, particularly after reading the novel and really thinking about the movie, becomes even more of an aporia. He gives the line in that scene, "Once a pancake, always a pancake," a reference to Delilah that became the title of Sterling Brown's critique of mainly the film. He seems to have been mainly talking about the film, but a little bit about the novel as well. And the immense popularity of them. I mean, that's what made them a target. Now, let's describe the confounding scene. That's where Claudette Colbert actually formally offers Delilah a share in the business that she has created using Delilah's recipe and using Delilah as a mascot.
Yes.
Delilah refuses it, which I think Sterling Brown is right to call just an updated version of the slave refusing her freedom.
No, I think that's right. Now, the thing is, again...
But why is this scene even there?
Because I think
it is so troubling.
It is troubling. I don't think that it is trying to show a realistic depiction of any black person in that position. Nobody would really act that way. But this is the way the stereotype held in the white imagination would behave, right? And that's what this movie is about. This is a movie made by white people about the way white people perceive all of these situations.
Yes, but sometimes she seems like a real character with her own subjectivity when she's with her daughter.
Yeah,
but the rest of the time, she seems like somebody made up by the white imagination.
I think, again, what you have to take away from this is that even though it's not stated as explicitly or explicitly at all in the film, there is the same logic operative for the Delilah in the book and the Delilah in the movie. The only thing that matters is the state of your soul, the state of your relationship between mother and daughter, possibly, and how you stand with God. Anything going on with the business world, which is characterized as a white world, that is just a snare and a delusion. Whatever they're offering you there, it's not going to change anything about where you stand existentially. So who gives a fuck?
I was thinking that because there is that element. Yes, it's obviously black intellectuals who were rightly criticizing this movie based on how would black people actually act, how do black people actually think.
Of course you would take 20% of a corporation.
Of course, yes, no one would ever behave this way. It's insulting and ridiculous. But within the movie's terms, that is how it's presented. Like Ned Sparks calling her a pancake, he is the voice of cynicism. He is not the authorial voice of the movie.
Of course not.
He's not an authoritative voice. He is the voice of cynicism, pragmatism, and capitalism, and she considers herself outside of that for reasons, like you say, some religious reasons, spiritual reasons, but also for reasons of being excluded, even within the gesture of being included.
Yeah, I think she has a higher pragmatism that shows her more clearly than Ned Sparks is able to see that it doesn't matter in a lot of ways whether she gets 20% of this business or not. She's not going to be able to make the kind of life she would want to make anyway, because she's still trapped in America in 1925 or whatever it is.
Now, this is something interesting that Sirk said about a key change that he made to his version. He was thinking about that scene. He decided to not have a business and to keep Delilah, whose name is changed to Annie, as a maid, because he thought that, well, now if a black woman owned part of a multi-million-dollar business, she could just go off and live wherever she wants to and live life however she wants to in 1959. Of course, now, to us now, thinking of 1959, that seems incredibly naive.
Yeah.
That's like pre-civil rights.
Well, yeah, the very first stirrings of civil rights. You know, the Montgomery bus boycott had already happened. There were some things happening in the 50s, but it certainly wasn't full-blown political rights yet. That was still to come in the mid-1960s.
We haven't even talked about the context of passing and how this became a common theme of novels because of Jim Crow laws and what does even all of this mean? The insanity of this idea within the South that anyone with either one drop of black blood...
Yeah, well, that is in Showboat,
black.
Right? One of the biggest entertainment properties of the 20s and would again be in the 30s when Universal finally gets its adaptation out to the theaters after the Lumleys lose control of Universal. But it was a big movie as well, and that movie does talk about those laws.
And the danger in question is miscegenation, that someone should unknowingly have sex with someone who is quote-unquote black.
Right.
And so Paola, or the daughter, is faced with this absolute psychosis that she has to contend with, whereas she keeps saying, I want to be white, I look white, but I am black. In the film, too, they seem to be two different people coming from two different worlds because of the greater restrictions put on how Delilah, the black-looking woman, can behave. Now, I read an article on the reception of the movie in the South by black newspapers writing about showings in black theaters, because there were movies that were specifically shown in black theaters after their first run, and this was one of them.
Well, let's not forget, too, Universal had no theater chain of its own. They were the major studio that didn't have that. So all of their movies were distributed through second-run theaters or by paying exorbitant fees to first-run theaters owned by Paramount or Warner Brothers, etc.
This movie got apparently more discussion by black critics and by people writing into the newspapers in Atlanta than any other of the 1930s, including Gone with the Wind.
Oh, it makes sense.
The main catalyst for this enthusiastic reaction was the fact that Paola is being played by a black woman.
Yeah. A very politically engaged black woman as well, Freddie Washington.
And the fact that she was allowed to express this degree of dissatisfaction with her lot as a Black person in the movie, even within this context of passing and shame, which Freddie Washington, of course, strongly disavowed.
Yeah.
That was very exciting to see something like that. That was subversive. And what's very interesting about this article, I'll give its name too, Imitation of Life in a Segregated Atlanta, Its Promotion, Distribution, Reception. Matthew H. Berenstein and Dana F. White, Film History, Volume 19, Issue 2.
So let's begin discussing the film as it's presented to us here. We start out in Atlantic City, in a middle-class dwelling that looks a lot nicer than the one that we picture when we're reading the novel, actually. Bea Pullman is in a somewhat similar situation to the character after her husband has died, except that her dad is also gone.
Yeah, so
it's
she
just
doesn't...
her and her daughter, that's it, in this big house.
She doesn't have him to contend with, and she doesn't, as we've already indicated, she doesn't seem like she's endlessly tearing her hair out, although we're given some evidence that she feels a bit harassed.
She's having trouble doing everything at once, but she doesn't feel alienated from her daughter. She seems to be having a lot of fun with her as she's getting her ready for the day. They're playing with the quack quack.
Yeah, the daughter wants the quack quack, which comes back at the end of the movie as a symbol of the sex that Claudette Colbert's never going to get to have.
Doesn't want to go to the day nursery, so that's been her arrangement. She's actually got enough money, I guess, to take her daughter to the day nursery while she goes out and sells maple syrup on the boardwalk.
So clearly the screenwriters did not want the same sense of incessant horror and desperation to be part of this movie experience.
No, but we're still living on a shoestring here, and it's clear that she doesn't have much put by. Maybe the house is paid for or something like that, right? Maybe her husband already had this house when they got married. All of that's in the background. We never see any of the stuff leading up to the marriage or the marriage itself. She's already a widow when the movie starts. And while she is trying to handle both the responsibility of mother and salesperson, she's got the phone call that distracts her from the bath. The kettle's boiling over. There is a caller at the door. She walks over and it's Louise Beavers.
Did you notice Stahl's moving camera?
It's a beautiful looking movie.
A lot of fluid moving camera. So we get quite the shot of Delilah being introduced to us, established by the camera as an important person.
And Louise Beavers, already by 1934, would have been fairly well known to audiences. She had played a lot of supporting roles in other movies, but obviously no one would have had an opportunity to see her in such a front and center role as this. These were pretty rare in white supremacist Hollywood of the 30s and 40s. That obviously explains a lot of what you were saying about why this movie generated so much interest, that there were Black characters that had any opportunity to talk about their lives in any way. And that was a big deal.
And that interacted with their family, especially in such an important way.
Rather than just being part of someone else's family and someone else's story. Now, in this movie, Delilah is both. She is stuck playing servant and chorus to a white family's story, but she also has her own story going on.
So, for the sake of your editing, I don't want us to go through both plots in complete detail. So we need to telescope a bit here.
Quickly, we get into a situation where the two women, they like each other and they forge an alliance. Colbert doesn't see how it's possible because she can't pay any money for Delilah's services. Delilah is willing to work for room and board because she needs a house that will accept Peola as well. So we're already off on an exploitative foot here, an amicably exploitative foot, and we're only going to get worse and worse in that regard. And the movie is aware of this. It's not unaware of it. That would be ridiculous. They fairly quickly establish a household with roles that are clearly assigned. Delilah is taking over as the mother, and Bea is going to navigate the world outside, and it's up to her to figure out how to get ahead in that world.
And right away, we move into the second phase of exploitation, which is the theft of this pancake recipe to form a business.
It's a very different trajectory towards business success in the film. It's a lot more using Claudette Colbert's adventurous skills that we'll see in many movies, how she can get ahead using her wit and charm.
In the novel, Bee gets a loan from the maple sugar company once she gets this idea.
Based on the false premise that she is her husband. All of it's based on lying and posing as a man.
To them, although to her customers, obviously she can't really do that.
No, but the financing is all achieved by posing as a man. Yeah. The reverse of what happens in here, where she gets everything that she needs by being a really sharp business person right off the bat, but also not being shy about flirting a little as she does it.
Want to talk about realism? This is one area where the novel is actually more realistic.
Probably.
Or else, why wouldn't every woman be starting a business this way?
It's true. No, this is more the movie realm. This is because it's Claudette Colbert. Yeah. This is what she would do. She is not going to be bested by any man. She is going to work around them and cajole them and get what she needs out of them.
So right away you see kind of the basis for how this novel is going to be converted to a movie, to a Hollywood movie that has Hollywood stars in it. So it's the basis for the Sirk sort of meta version of that.
A procession of men who are potential obstacles to getting what she wants, and all of them fall to her. You've got Henry Armetta, the painter. You've got Alan Hale, the furnishings man. Even that guy at the beginning that rents her the place. I don't know the actor's name, but he turns up in a lot of places. He's the guy with the twitch in You Can't Take It With You.
Okay.
But basically she pulls off a brilliant business maneuver. That's what it boils down to. She gets a lease on assurance that she is going to transform the place and renovate it.
They establish her as a brilliant business person without it taking hundreds of pages of stream of consciousness to do so.
Yeah, she just instinctively knows this is how you manipulate everyone so that you can open up a store without paying any money. That's all based on the premise that she knows they're going to make money once they can open up. And that could have backfired, but it doesn't. And that's not the kind of story this movie is telling. This movie is telling us what happens when things do go right with capitalist dealing for you. Still a lot of problems. We cut ahead pretty quickly to successful boardwalk business, but still fairly small scale. The big celebration that we cut to is that she's paid off all of her debts finally, after she was paying $50 a month to Alan Hale, and it was like $1,600 she owed him, so it's a lot of months have passed. They say 5 years have passed, actually, when she's talking to Louise Beavers. They're all living in the back of this store, 2 mothers and 2 daughters.
And this is where we get some of the scenes with Paola having trouble at school. The scene that starts off, though, is where the girls are going to school, and that's where they're doing their homework together, and we get that remark about their respective intelligence. So actually, one way that the movie gets some critique of racism in, or of white supremacy in, without having Delilah be its mouthpiece, is in the way it develops these 2 girl characters and the contrast, which is not the same in the Sirk movie at all, but the contrast where Jessie is really a bit of an idiot.
A bit, yeah.
And, clearly has just been allowed to develop this way because of what we now call her white privilege.
Yeah, the way has been smoothed for her, whereas Paola faces obstacle after obstacle.
Now that's kind of implicit in the novel, but there's no direct comparison of the girls as there is here in the movie throughout.
No, but the movie does dwell a lot on how well they get along together in general.
Which is developed much more, again, in the Sirk script.
The mothers are getting along great, too. They've forged this business together. They've kept everyone alive and healthy. The next step Colbert has not come up with. That comes from Ned Sparks.
Now, is he supposed to represent the Depression?
Well, see, again, this has to be going on long before the Depression, because the movie doesn't make sense time-wise otherwise. If it's 1933 or 34 in the final scenes, then this has to be the early 1920s. Anyway, he's fallen on hard times, whatever the cause. There were a lot of people that fell on hard times in the 20s too, so it's fine. But yeah, of course we associate Ned Sparks with the Depression. He's probably most famous nowadays for his role in Gold Diggers of 1933 as Barney, the man who's putting on a show and wants the men marching marching, marching, my forgotten man.
Of course, this guy, and there's actually a little joke about Forgotten Man later in the movie between him and Warren William. But he is some kind of high-powered businessman who's out of a job, it appears, because that's what the role he comes to serve for Claudette Colbert.
Whatever he knows about business, he must have at least had some kind of business dealings in the past, and he moves into that role after he tells her the way to make real money on this concept is box it, mass market it.
So he is kind of Flake without the sex, I guess.
Exactly. Although Flake doesn't even come up with big picture ideas like that.
Oh, Flake's an accountant.
In the novel, it's all B that comes up with genius ideas like this.
Well, Flake does have his good China idea because he's an accountant for a China shipping department or something.
Yeah, but the big picture ideas come from B. And no, in this movie, that is something they take away from her and they give it to Ned Sparks.
Sure.
She doesn't seem like she's gonna make that leap to... It's not even a chain of restaurants. It's every grocery store, the aisles filled with pictures of Delilah selling pancakes and waffles.
Which is, of course, like the whole idea of creating this kennel space that is integral to the theme of the novel is gone. It's all gone.
Well, it is a cozy looking restaurant, but no, that's not at all where the movie goes. Everything starts to focus on the grocery empire.
In fact, we have no idea or care what's going on in B's head for the whole thing. Like, it's not like she has some master plan where she's going to give up her business and settle down or anything that we hear about.
No, she just winds up lucking into this huge windfall. She got things started, then Ned Sparks really ignites it with this box it idea, and everything just sort of steamrolls.
But again, all of this makes sense if the screenwriters gave no shits about this character and were only interested in what was going on with Paola.
Well, I think they care about the Colbert character too.
No, I don't think they do. This romantic comedy plotline about a businesswoman who's lucked into her success, it's just there because it has to be there for the movie.
I don't think you have to choose between them that way so strikingly.
Well, Sirk does.
Yes, Sirk does, but I don't think Stahl does. I think that he finds both stories interesting.
But what's interesting, though, is the way that structurally, and this is what got Sirk, because he loves these structural contrasts, this is what got him really interested in the screenplay, because he claims he didn't read the novel and that his idea for the movie was based on a treatment of the Stahl movie.
Right, because he didn't watch the movie either. That's what he said.
It's hard to believe based on some of the similar shots.
Yeah.
Like the way that they're using framing Delilah behind things Stahl frequently uses, like she's caged.
Yeah, no, I don't believe it at all.
I guess it's a frequent enough melodrama device. Anyway, definitely somebody read the novel who worked on the Sirk screenplay, because there is stuff from the novel that is not in the Stahl movie that ends up transformed in the Sirk movie.
Sticking with the 34 film for now, they quickly ascend to, the highest echelon of wealth in America, and time flies by. Paola has terrible experiences, as she does in the novel.
But nothing compared to what happens in the Sirk movie.
No, it's true. But very upsetting to her, for sure. She's finding out things that no one should have to find out. Of course, every time she does find something new out, it causes another blow up with her mother, who becomes the scapegoat for all of this, because she is the only thing tying Paola to this identity that she doesn't want, because she perceives it rightly to be something that is gonna land her into all kinds of constrained situations.
As with Bee and her daughter, however, the mother-daughter relationships are much closer in the movies into adulthood than they are in the novel.
True, although the movie does make a lot of the fact that, Claudette Colbert still has a very young child picture of Jessie on her piano. She doesn't really think of her as an adult, even though she basically is by the end of the movie. And that causes confusion for Warren William when he comes on the scene.
But certainly Paola expresses less revulsion toward her mother.
Oh, of course.
Which must have been really hard for the screenwriters to process, and were like, this is not going in the movie. Because it's like part of the disturbing emotional elements of the story is all of this ambivalence where mothers and daughters are horrified and revolted by each other as well as passionately attracted to one another, right? So none of that craziness. The craziness does get back into the Sirk movie performance and blocking, for sure. But it's not so much in the Stahl movie, which is a lot calmer. Anyway, Paola expresses much more affection for and understanding of her mother in the movie than she does in the novel.
Yeah, because we actually get a lot more directly from Paola in the movie. The book, she remains mostly a concept.
Well, until the time she appears to make her goodbye speech when she's already made her decision and just wants her mother to shut up and quit wailing.
Right, but even there, yeah, she's got a prepared speech, she makes it, and she exits the whole novel, right? In the movie, we're a lot more centered in Paola's mind.
And in dialogue with her mother rather than, these schematic speeches.
She's a very intelligent person. She is looking at the world in a pretty lucid way, and she's making decisions for herself. She knows how badly this is going to affect her mother, and we have several scenes that illustrate that. Cigar shop where she's working, Delilah shows up and she says, "Tell this woman to go away. She's crazy. I don't know what she's talking about." This is heart-wrenching for both parties here, both the mother and the daughter. It precipitates the final decision where Paola does return home and again gives a different version of that speech from the novel.
Yeah, a much less crazy one.
That's one of the big drawbacks of the novel, right? Which we kind of talked about. Paola makes all of her decisions based on a romantic attachment to this one white man who symbolizes a lot of things for her, obviously. And she goes off to Bolivia and never comes back. In the movie, partly because of the code, they would never have been able to have a love story for Paola. But anyway, in some ways that works out better because then it's all about Paola's existential dilemma.
Interestingly, in that article about the reception of the movie in Atlanta by Black viewers, the authors quote from a librarian and poet who wrote into the newspaper. He talks about Paola's character in terms of things he's read about real life people passing and people he's, I guess, known. Anyway, in real life terms rather than in terms of character types or stereotypes. And he writes that he thinks the movie has made a mistake in portraying a woman as wanting to pass because she wants to be white rather than because she wants the opportunities of white people. He thinks this is a mistake that white people make that is flattering to them, basically, right? Now,
I don't think
because he is arguing that any black woman with the financial opportunities that this character has would not want to pass.
That's definitely an argument that you could make. Obviously, yeah, she and Delilah would be among the richest black people in America in the movie, and
Delilah can write her own check, basically.
Of course. And she does, right? Even though she doesn't make that deal with Claudette Colbert, she does have any money she ever wants, given in this weird, informal way that is not based on any kind of contract. But
I think the incipient idea, which is really teased out in the Sirk movie, is that she wants the American dream to be available to her.
Yeah, exactly, of course. And with that all playing out next to her, it's not that she wants to be white, obviously. It's that she wants no restrictions on herself. To not be white in America at that time, and now too, I would say, means there are restrictions on what you can do.
And the fact that they grow up in this quasi-equal partnership in both the novel and the movie with these white people, I mean, that is just a painful, irritating contrast for her constantly, right? To see how B can pursue this and how Jessie can reap the rewards of it, and none of that is available to her, although there's nothing different about her and there's nothing that looks different about her.
Yeah, so she doesn't want to change in any way. She just wants people to leave her alone and let her do what she wants and not have to worry all the time about whether she's stepping out of bounds in some way. Even if she's got millions of dollars, you could still get into a lot of trouble in America at that time and now. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, nobody may care how rich you are.
Not that Zora Neale Hurston was rich, but there is a story, I think told by her, where she was on one of her travels with Fannie Hurst, and there was a restaurant, a fancy restaurant, and of course Fannie Hurst is rich. Fancy restaurant, and it had a color line. So Hurst spontaneously decided to pass her off as an African princess so that they could get in.
Oh my god, yeah.
I think Hurst tells this story in an essay that she wrote about their relationship. And then afterwards they were driving away and Hurston made some remark about how such a great meal could taste so bitter or something like that.
Yeah, sounds really terrible.
Yeah.
God.
But I mean, as an example of, it's not like Fannie Hurst, no matter how rich or famous she was, could just say, "You're letting my friend in."
No.
That's the end.
Of course not. These rules were enforced. Yes, there were plenty of nice places. There was the Talented Tenth. There was this whole para-culture that Black Americans were able to create for themselves when they attained middle class or higher lifestyles. But still, it was very circumscribed, and if you stepped outside of those bounds, that bubble, you were right back in the hellscape.
To Piola, this is being ghettoized even at its best.
Again, there's a lot of room for debate about all of that.
I mean, her situation just illustrates the arbitrariness of these decisions.
The great drama of the film is that the cost of the freedom that she is aiming for is absolutely, biblically disowning her mother, like the disciples with Christ. I mean...
Yeah, and then the mother turns into this, it really comes out in the Sirk movie, but is already implicit in Stahl's version, force of sentimentality, this gravitational force of emotion that is pulling you back into childhood, is pulling you back into regression, is dissolving all of your resolve, is blocking you from starting your own life as an independent person, realizing your potential and everything else. But it's also the source, the mother at the same time is, and that emotion is the source of all meaning at the same time.
It's a real conundrum, and that actually comes into focus very much in Fannie Hurst's autobiography. That is really how she talks about her mother. Absolutely stultifying force, and also the most important thing in her life.
And look how that gets used in Humoresque, which was based on a Hearst story, although I haven't read it yet.
No, we haven't read it. We have no idea what that movie's relationship to the story is. This is a theme that will recur, it seems, in her books, and the movie really gets at it. Both movies really get at that.
But that's also why they are two of the most powerful maternal melodramas ever made. Two of the most emotional movies ever made. I cried so much.
Yeah.
I was exhausted after watching both of them. Particularly the Sirk movie is a nonstop orgy of emotion. And of course, maybe this is almost transitioning to talking about it formally. Of course, he is never stupider than when he talks about this movie. There's nothing almost he says about it that you can use to help you understand it because of the gotcha game with the intellectual critics who are paying attention to him. So the critic is kind of going, "Sir, I thought you were cool. I thought you were ironic. I thought you were an intellectual.
That's the whole basis upon which we've recuperated you."
Exactly. So how come your movies are so emotional? How come they're so effective as melodrama? And Sirk is like, "Don't know what you're talking about. Don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Nope, they're not. They're not. They're not. They're not. Never intended to do that. Got no talent for that. Absolutely. That's just Americans. In Germany, everybody understood that the movies have no emotion.
It's just making fun of everything. Yeah. Well, before we move to the Sirk, though, I do think we need to talk a little bit more about the original film. The finale, Freddie Washington does an incredible job in that scene when she shows up at the funeral. And I really do want to talk a bit more about Louise Beavers as well.
Okay.
It's true, there's some, perhaps code-enforced white supremacist logic forcing her to play certain scenes in some ways, but at other times, that all gets undermined by the clear-eyed understanding of what's really going on in the domains that matter to her. One of the most interesting scenes can be read as really insulting or can be read as really, really keenly critical is that scene where they ask her to pose for the picture that's going to adorn all of the pancake boxes. Because they say, Delilah, smile. She smiles the way she normally would.
Yeah.
Like a normal person. Then they're like, "No, Delilah, smile." That's a command performance from whiteness to the stereotype of blackness that they're all subscribing to.
And then she makes a sort of Jerry Lewis face.
Well, not only that, but she freezes. It's like she leaves her body. It's incredible, though, don't you think? She stays frozen like that, like she's not there anymore. She just smiles for the box in the Aunt Jemima pose. and she's gone. She's not there anymore
And
until Claudette Colbert comes over and says, okay, you can snap out of it now. We don't need you to do that anymore.
It seems to be a weird joke based on her, I don't know, lack of understanding that the pose is over.
Yeah, of course you can read it that way, and I'm sure many people did, and it could be taken that way, so it's a dangerous thing to do. But to me, it reads as really, really starkly critical of the whole relationship there, even between these good friends. Delilah sometimes has to leave her body and just be this thing that B wants her to be.
Sure. Well, not just B wants her to be. B
Everyone wants her to be.
That is what the
Yeah,
whole
B
world
is marketing her.
Wants her to be, yes.
Appropriating her, using her to make millions.
Well, another scene that Beavers plays very effectively is... Like, her daughter has many times told her, don't call yourself my mammy.
Yeah.
Right? Don't say mammy to me. And in this scene, she's comforting an adult Paola. And I can't remember which situation she's comforting her for, but it's pretty dire. She keeps talking to her and trying to soothe her in the usual way that she does it, in this southern dialect way that irritates her daughter.
Right.
And then finally she slips in, talk to your mama, your mother, dear. And the inflection that she puts into that word is so powerfully, I'm going to start crying just saying it, because it's like, I mean, you could take this as white writers not knowing what they're doing, because dialect isn't necessarily a mask that you have to drop, but that's how it's written. Like, for a moment she's dropping this mask that she has been forced to wear by the white people, right? And she's just, at least for a moment, being what her daughter wants her to be.
It's quite something.
The way her voice changes in that moment is incredible.
I don't think you can say enough good things about Louise Beavers in this movie.
And certainly Northern critics were highly praising her for it and wanting there to be, I think, Oscar attention, and they were starting to talk in that way.
Yeah, and a lot of those critics may have thought this is just an authentic portrayal or something, but so much more layered than that.
Well, she herself was, of course, not Southern, for one thing.
Right. No, I mean, I've never heard an interview with her. I would love to.
And this is the only chance she had to, well, as far as I know, to really develop that character.
Yeah, she's in so many movies, but every other one, maybe 100 she was in, it's usually commenting on the white characters' lives, at best, right? And playing a subservient role in their story. Now, Paola's final scene, it's just gut-wrenching.
And Freddie Washington, refusing to pass as she did not get many opportunities on film.
No, so she made a very courageous decision at that time. She was in a position to think about all these issues in a way that neither of us certainly would have to. She put her all into this final scene. Her decision to break through that crowd.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like, that you can feel, I hate to talk about authenticity in any context, including acting, but you can feel that something real and method is happening for the performer.
Yeah.
Here. Yeah, for sure.
So all of the plans that she's made, clearly she had thought it all through, and this is what she thought she needed to do. And I don't think that this changes her perception of the world. It doesn't make her think everything's okay now or anything, but it does mean that she's acknowledging the importance of that relationship to her mother is something that she wishes she'd been able to keep alive while functioning in the world the way she wanted to. And the fact that she couldn't do that is the source of all the tragedy in this movie.
Sure, but what she says, and again, this has been taken by people who want to assert rigidly that melodrama is a conservative genre, has been taken as her punishment for passing.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
That when she turns around and says, I killed my mother. I mean, surely any half-witted viewer would understand that she is taking upon herself guilt for something that isn't her fault.
No, she was turned into a weapon that killed her mother by white supremacy.
Yes, exactly.
That's what's happened there. And that doesn't feel any better to the person that's been used in that way than if they actually bore responsibility for it. It's horrible.
So in that moment, that is how she feels.
Yeah.
Then the final shot is of the family getting into the car, but she goes in the front.
Now, I do want to say one final word here before we move on about the Claudette Colbert, Warren William, Rochelle Hudson storyline in this movie, because I do think it's essential to the design of Stahl's film that this does play like a romantic comedy, that so much of it is quite fun, that Claudette Colbert is having an adventure in business, having some enjoyable times with Warren William and Ned Sparks, that story, the fact that I feel like it's an effective drama on its own, in a way, like it would be a movie I would watch anyway, what was going on with them. That just makes it all the more painful for Delilah and Peola, because what they're seeing is something enjoyable that is going on in the world. And that's something that the Sirk movie doesn't really have, because Lana Turner has no capacity for joy. Whereas Claudette Colbert really does have a way of taking you into a movie and having you have fun with her.
What's more, Sandra Dee, the movie allows her real weight to her problems. Like, this is really fearful stuff, this direction that she's heading in, this emotional direction that she's heading in. It's almost like she takes on some of the qualities of...
Well, she's hysterical.
Of Bee's disappointment in the novel.
Yeah.
Right? Her romantic disappointment. And also, just, I love Sandra Dee. I think she gives a good performance. She's a really interesting screen presence. And she is so fucked up in this movie that she almost seems as fucked up. Like, the only person who could seem more fucked up than her is Susan Connor.
Yeah, and Rochelle Hudson, playing the analogous character in the earlier film, she has a disappointment when she finds out that Warren William probably isn't going to go for her. He thinks she's too young and he's already in love with her mother.
Which is what makes Claudette Colbert's renunciation seem a little bit ridiculous. But at the same time, it's almost kind of admirable and joyful that she decides to, for at least a time, put her daughter first.
It's a very acceptable melodrama ending with the potential for a happy ending for everyone later on the white side of the ledger, right? Which is, I think, what the movie wants you to feel. That, yeah, these people are going to have good lives, and then...
Well, not for Peola.
That's what I'm saying. She's not on that side of the ledger. She's on the side where nothing good can ever happen.
Yes. Well, I mean, she has gone back to college. We hear that, and that's, as far as the white people are concerned, it's like, phew, she's stopped rebelling. Hopefully her life will be on the straight and narrow path now, and all will be well, and she'll settle down. She,
in a lot of ways, kind of closed off any other opportunity, because at this huge funeral with all of New York in attendance, or anyway, all of New York's reporters in attendance, she shows up and there's this big scene. Obviously, that was written up around the world. She no longer has to worry about passing anyway.
But we don't see her happy ending.
No, she has no happy ending.
It's just like a little, like I said, just a little relief in the mind of the white people.
They don't have to think about that problem anymore.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And obviously, Peola, she is going to have access to all the money she needs, and that certainly makes a difference in life, but she's still going to have to live in a world that actively hates anyone that it identifies in the way that it is identifying her.
She's given up her struggle, which maybe we can hope could be filled with a Freddie Washington-style political consciousness,
right,
rather than just mere submission.
So let's move on to the Sirk film. So now we're 1959.
Pre-civil rights era. This is the one everyone remembers.
Widescreen, Technicolor.
This was the one that made a gigantic impact on the American popular consciousness, comparable to Gone with the Wind. But better.
Much better.
Much better.
It's the last of the Sirk melodramas.
Yeah, he quit while he was at the top. It made an enormous amount of money. So it is, I think, I don't understand how Hollywood screenplays get written, because screenwriters of this one, the two attributed screenwriters, didn't do that much else.
No, Alan Scott, best known to me for writing a lot of the Fred and Ginger movies.
That much else that was profound. So I don't understand that kind of art making, because I feel like this is the best screenplay ever written.
It's pretty good.
And the most entertaining movie ever made. And the most emotionally devastating movie ever made. And the most fun production of a movie by Ross Hunter ever. This is such a great movie. I can't even wrap my head around it. The template for how to adapt that crazy fucking novel into a Hollywood movie is set by the Stahl movie, right? And that is what along with the novel, obviously, it seems, the screenwriters and Sirk were working with. They just build on it.
Yeah, the Piola crescendo is the innovation of the Stahl film, and the Sirk movie keeps that. I was shocked to find that that wasn't in the book, so these are things that happen when Hollywood got a hold of it.
But in part due to the different era, finally we're allowed to get our movie where clearly Piola is the most...
Well, she's called Sarah Jane in this film.
Yeah, Sarah Jane is the most dynamic and interesting character. And it's also a beautiful dovetailing of the era with the director, because this is the kind of character that really gets Sirk excited.
Unfortunately not played by an African-American actress.
No.
But yeah, Susan Connor gives an incredible performance. Everybody does, in their own ways.
In their own ways.
Yeah.
They are used as effectively as a director can use an actor in every case. Even John Gavin. John Gavin, whose job is to inexplicably adore this middle-aged bitch. She's nice enough.
Yeah, I mean...
She's not nice to him, though.
Now, again, when you compare it to the way the Claudette Colbert-Warren-William relationship goes, I mean, this is so different. Like, they're actually having fun. John Gavin's not having any fun
Nobody
in this movie
is.
With Lana Turner.
See,
Lana Turner cannot have fun.
So Sirk claims he couldn't read the novel because he started reading it and it seemed awful and like he would hate it. But his sensibility is much closer to Fannie Hurst's in terms of his ironies and in terms of his vision of the world as hell for everyone, much more than the Stahl movie.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, John Stahl, one of the great things about John Stahl, but it is a thing that makes him very different from Sirk, right, is that Stahl brings a kind of romantic comedy element to all of these melodramas that he worked on.
Not to Backstreet.
Yes!
That's a vision of hell.
No, but we talked about Backstreet, and that movie starts right out. Irene Dunne, it feels like she could be in a romantic comedy until she isn't. But she starts out, it shows us that Irene Dunne is going to be a great romantic comedy star, because that's how her character seems in the early scenes of Backstreet, and that's because Stahl is great at bringing that element into movies, even movies that are on very heavy subjects.
Obsession?
Yeah, even that one.
I don't know, it's been a long time since I saw the Stahl version of that.
They all have a very light touch to them.
Yes.
And that's not what Sirk is interested in doing.
No, although he can also, Stahl, get the pathos, obviously. That's why he's good at melodrama.
That's what I'm saying. Stahl is really incredible at mixing those things that just have a hard time going together in the same movie. And all of his movies do that.
And yet, because of the way it's making fun of Hollywood movies and of melodrama, because of that, this movie is so fun to watch. And that's kind of what takes the place of the romantic comedy. It's like the melodrama scenes with the white people. The white person melodrama is the comic relief.
It is, yeah.
And yet it still has, because it's like, that is the normal movie, and this is the movie no one's supposed to make. That's the one that Sirk is actually interested in about the black people. The normal person movie is still a super fun movie that you'd want to watch anyway, right? But it's only with the contrast that you see how fucking ridiculous it is. And that's where Sirk makes use of the ridiculous, wonderful Ross Hunter production with the costumes, Lana Turner's Barbie doll costumes and mid-century modern furnished houses and all of that, and the picture windows that look out onto paintings.
In the Stahl movie, what you're getting is a romantic comedy that is making the plight of Black Americans in the 1930s seem even more horrible than they would seem if you were just looking at them in isolation. And in the Sirk movie, what you're getting is a movie about how the racial regime in America is something horrific in 1959 and will continue to be so for all the way up till today. And that is exposing what's going on with the white characters as ludicrous.
Yeah.
So that's a very different emphasis.
But these aren't normal white characters. They end up beautifully representing white supremacy because what they are is fantasy movie characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like the kind of movies that white Americans want to see and see themselves in.
Let's set up this movie. It's not in Atlantic City anymore. It's in New York. Lana Turner.
But we start with an Atlantic City type scene on a beach.
Yeah, it could be anywhere, any eastern seaboard area. It seems like, I think it's Coney Island. Lana Turner is a widower widower. She has a young daughter, but they're at the beach. She's not working at the moment. They're trying to get some leisure time here. She's lost her daughter. This is a problem. She is combing the beach, looking for her lost child. She catches the attention of John Gavin, photographer. He sort of becomes a chorus to this crucial first meeting that she has with Annie Johnson, who also has a daughter named Sarah Jane. And they're on the beach basically because they're homeless and they're just trying to figure out what to do. They have no idea what to do.
The only thing, so we're no longer in the context of the Great Migration. The only thing Annie says about their situation is that she has come from a place where my color devils my baby. So did they come from the South?
Don't know.
And they're trying to find, I guess, domestic work, and she can't get someone to take her in with her daughter.
Right.
She's also a widow.
Yeah, her husband died before Sarah Jane was born. Again, they come quickly to an understanding.
They're brought together by the girls who are already playing together. So this relationship is much stronger. This movie gave me, when I first saw it, when I was very young, I come from, like so many people, a blended family. The little blonde in this movie looked a lot like my little stepsister, and I looked quite a bit like Sarah Jane, but fatter. And so this movie gave me a really strong sense of single mothers and blended families. That felt emotionally perfect. Both the joy that these little girls take in each other and the tensions, which of course are greatly heightened by the racial problem.
At first it's just going to be one night while Annie and Sarah Jane try to figure out what to do. But it's all working so well. Everyone agrees that they can play different roles in this household and they can make something work here. Well, Lana Turner tries to bring in some money, mostly through auditions, but she's also doing this envelope thing. She never appropriates from Annie in the way that Bea appropriates from Delilah. But during the early part of this movie, they do wind up surviving more because of Annie, right? Annie takes on odd jobs and brings in laundry and does all kinds of other things to help support the household. She's
actually more... Well, I mean, she is this, too, in the novel. She's very much filling the role of the wife.
Yeah, a wife that also works outside the home and inside the home.
A wife who is working inside and outside the home so that the husband can establish his career.
Yeah, Lana Turner can take a flyer on all these different opportunities and fail repeatedly to get anyone's attention. It's a tough business.
Now, Lana Turner, unlike the Bees, is a consciously ambitious person, and that is the reason for her wanting to have this career.
It's really important to her that she succeed.
She's not doing this out of necessity. Out of necessity, she could get a job that doesn't involve this much uncertainty.
Well, yeah, what she says to John Gavin is that her husband was a director of a small theater somewhere in the Midwest, and when he died, she decided, okay, I'm going to New York. But she had to work for 5 years to save up to go to New York. So she worked at something else, something pedestrian, for 5 years, and then came to New York, try to achieve stardom. Yeah, it's all been a means to an end, unlike all of the sort of unconscious striving that Bea does in the book and in the 1934 film.
The completely ludicrous premise of the movie that knows that it's ludicrous is that this middle-aged woman captivates, not only is launching an acting career, and that is flagged, what do they call it? Lampshaded. It is lampshaded, but she is instantly captivating to every man who meets her, and who therefore opens the doors for her.
Lana Turner's obviously still a beautiful woman in 1959.
She looks middle-aged. No one could realistically be launching an acting career. But the thing is, what the movie trades on is the fact that she is the star of the movie.
And that she's Lana Turner, and she
is carrying the movie financially. Like, this movie did really well because of her and for her. It's not the only reason the movie did well, but she did help.
She is what America thinks of when they think of a beautiful movie star.
Sure.
Who's been at it for a long time.
But there is certainly an element of wish fulfillment fantasy here. And it did strike me, watching it this time, movies of this era, of the late 50s, more and more you see increasingly ancient leading men from the 30s and 40s showing up with...
Audrey Hepburn.
Being partnered with women 20 or 30 years younger. And here in these Sirk movies, which were extremely popular, you could sometimes see women of the same era being stars of the same era who are women being paired with men, 10 to 12 years younger. That was the equivalent.
Yeah, all of Sirk's movies star women who got their first important roles in the 1930s. Jane Wyman, Lana Turner, Barbara Stanwyck, right? I mean, the only ones that don't fit that are Bacall and Dorothy Malone. They come from the 40s,
So the idea of the movie is that Gavin is chasing Lana Turner. Lana Turner is chasing the dream. Sarah Jane is chasing the dream with a severe handicap. Sandra Dee is chasing her mother, and Annie is chasing Sarah Jane.
Yeah. And everybody
Only Annie and Sarah Jane, I want to use their character names for some reason.
They're all in for a rough time.
And no one will get what they want. Exactly. Even when John Gavin gets Lana Turner, it's a total anticlimax. That dinner, that silent dinner where they realize how they have no lives unless any of the other people are there.
And there's a demented clown painting on the wall right behind them.
There's always that actually follows them around through the house.
That must be something that Sirk did talk about with his Sirk on Sirk friends.
Well, he's like
Didn't you notice the clown?
No one would ever question him on stuff like that, though. He's like, the clown painting is like, heavily symbolic clown in The Blue Angel.
Right.
It just shows up randomly to make Emil Jannings feel humiliated. As if he needed more of that.
So the way things develop here, Annie holds down the fort at home. Lana Turner has a few setbacks at first. She has to deal with some gross behavior from Robert Alda and presumably other men too in the past.
Yeah, but she
not
just
necessarily dramatized.
Brushes that all off.
No, she's very hurt by it, right? Like when she gets home after that false start with Robert Alda, she just collapses into Annie's lap.
Sure, but what is so brilliant about this performance, and I mean she's helped by the writing, the way the scenes are written, every scene, yeah, in a way, Lana Turner's, in a way, her performance is brilliant. I don't know if it's due to her, due to Sirk, due to the writers, due to all three.
No, she's perfect in this movie.
Every single scene, the character is acting a melodrama part, including this hurt and disappointment.
Much more brittle than the Claudette Colbert character. You can't really picture the Colbert character collapsing that way. She does have very intimate contact with Delilah, but Delilah is rubbing her feet after long days at work and stuff like that. She's not leaning on Delilah for emotional support in the way that Lana Turner does.
What I'm saying is that Lana Turner's character is self-dramatizing.
I understand that, but still a form of deep anxiety there that is driving that.
I guess.
Well, it's not coming out of nowhere.
So yeah, Claudette Colbert, you're saying that her character never leans emotionally on Annie.
No, not really.
No,
right?
I think you're right. I think we don't get any scenes of that. There are the foot rubbing scenes. Now, this movie, part of the brilliance of this script is not only is it doing this thing of the silly white person movie and then the serious black person movie with their contrasts, and yet interweavings. It's not quite as simple as that. It's a more complex pattern. Because like I said, the two girls are made almost equivalents, near equivalent in their suffering later.
For very different things, but
and it's
still.
Annie herself who has to teach Laura at that point that, no, actually, I know we have the quote-unquote real problems, but no, your daughter's going through something serious and you have to pay attention.
Yeah, even if it's stupid, she might kill herself over this.
Exactly, right? It's she's having a little emotional crisis here. The script also incorporates within itself a critique of the earlier movie, like a critique of the earlier movie's handling and the source material's handling of race. So, for example, there's the cutting from the foot rub to some terrible serious shit happening with Sarah Jane, right?
Right.
It's a movie that has listened to the critiques that were made of the first movie and incorporated it into its irony.
Yeah,
and
it's definitely anticipating objections.
And there's several other cuts like that. Like the first one is intercutting Sarah Jane's passing at school, being caught passing at school, with the little mother-daughter bonding, where she's taking Susie's temperature, saying, "Oh, you're practically normal, haha."
Oh, yeah.
So, obviously white people problems is what we would call them now.
All better now.
It's the same idea.
Of course, much later on, when we're getting towards the end of Annie's life and she talks about all the people she'd like to have at her funeral, Lana Turner says, "It never occurred to me that you'd have friends outside of the house." And Juanita Moore says, well, you never asked about any of this.
I think that comes from the end of the novel, where Flake, in his flaky way...
Oh, he's such an idiot.
...makes his comment at the funeral about never having known there were so many black people in the world.
He's disgusting.
He uses a phrase that would now and probably then be considered more...
Yes, very offensive.
Offensive.
All these things that just foreground the fact that Lana Turner, even though she has this deep emotional bond with Annie in a way, she never really thinks about Annie as a person with a life outside of the home or any kind of context that goes beyond the scope of the little world they've developed together here.
This character is standing in a meta sort of way for all white audiences who have watched movies with black servants and never thought about them having any other life.
Exactly. And of course, one of the great additions to the script, when the specter first comes up, of Sarah Jane possibly being on a track where she's going to try to pass when she can. When they talk about, we're going to have to explain all of this to her, and she says, how do you explain to a child that they were born to be hurt?
Yeah, there are some quite amazing lines that Juanita Moore's character says.
Yeah, that really gets to the core of the Delilah of the novel's philosophy, that God set up the world so that certain people are just going to get the worst of it.
So you think that works
on Earth
pretty well with the novel's Gnosticism?
Well, it does, except that, of course, Annie doesn't push it the way Delilah does.
No, but that line just on itself is just so startling the first few times you hear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of what the screenplay does in this version is it brings back stuff that was in the novel that got lost in the first screenplay, but then pares it away to its essence like that. Whereas the novel does a lot of beating of dead horses, or white horses. White horses in
white horses
my
in
baby's
the blood.
Yeah.
As the story develops, Lana Turner does inevitably rise in the theater world. It's a bit of a crazy progression.
You and your beer can, watching a beer can go up and down while I'm going up and up and up. So she does. That's my favorite, possibly, line in any movie ever.
She gets an offer of a part. It's supposed to be high comedy, apparently. That whole scene is crazy.
Right, and there's the scene where you see what Lana Turner deliberately doing bad acting is like, and it's not actually like her normal acting.
No, it's different. And the scene does sound stupid, and it gives her a perfect opportunity to have this showdown with the playwright and remind him that this is a stupid scene that doesn't need to be in the play at all. And he, partly because he's taken with her already, actually listens and decides, yes, he's going to change his script to her specifications, and he wants her to play a totally different role now.
But these are all melodrama tropes that are so exaggerated that it calls attention
to how crazy it is.
To how ridiculous they are, but at the same time, they don't lose their fun, right? This is so fun to watch, all of this nonsense.
And Robert Alda, going back and forth very quickly, first he says, she's not really my client, to like a couple seconds later, like, isn't she great? Let's drop a contract. And
oh, he's a lot of fun in this movie. I love him.
He's a great actor, Robert Alda.
Sleazy producer. Or sleazy agent.
Sleazy agent with a heart of at least
tin.
Fool's gold. I mean, he sticks around throughout the whole rest of the movie.
Well, he does decide, like, is it out of the goodness of his heart that he gets her this opportunity, or is he still thinking of sleeping with her?
Maybe he can actually make some money on it because
she's so awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Because he didn't kickstart this whole thing. It's that ad that she did with the itch powder that caught the attention of the playwright.
I don't know. I think he maybe slipped that magazine under his nose.
I guess,
since he's going to get an agent's cut out of this.
Yeah, he's got an ulterior motive here. And he's not going to take it personally that Lana Turner didn't want to sleep with him.
We see the years and all of the comedies go by. They pass. Like 10 years or something. Then we get the big girls.
So we're right up to date.
By the way, there's like extra scenes that seem like they could have been in the novel that add to the horrible chills down your spine of the situation brewing in the household with the children. Like the one where Sarah Jane cuts open her little friend.
Well, they cut their respective wrists.
Little Susie.
To see what the blood looks like.
It's Sarah Jane's idea.
Yeah.
I just like the fact that there is this aggression in her. They're not like in this movie, she gets to express some aggression unconsciously towards Susie, but as a teenager, consciously towards Laura.
Susan Connor, the other thing about her character, Sarah Jane, is that she is extremely ambitious as well, not just to pass, which is, Piola basically, all she wants to do is pass. She likes the idea of any kind of job where she can pass. But Sarah Jane really wants to make it as an entertainer. She's getting her ambitions from Lana Turner.
Yes. Yeah, and Sirk does his little shoot them in a circle for both of them. He thinks that these two are parallel characters. Reasons that we've said, which is that all versions of them, but this movie draws it out more. These are the two characters that are... Well, actually, in the novel, it's more Delilah and Bee pursuing their phantasms. But in the first movie version, it becomes sort of implicit that these are the two characters with ambition.
Worldly ambition,
yeah.
rather than otherworldly ambition.
Bee and Piola, right? And then, yeah, it becomes much more explicit in the Sirk
Well, because in this movie, they have the same ambition.
Yeah, and for the first time, also, the Bee character, like I said, consciously has ambition. They're both chasing this American dream that Sirk thinks is a delusion.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a circle. They're going in a circle. They're obsessed. They're pathological.
Sarah Jane really is the person that has what it takes to follow in Laura Meredith's footsteps.
Yeah, she has the ruthlessness.
Yeah, obviously, Susie is not going to become a musical comedy star.
Susie is falling apart before our eyes, and anorexic.
She's very troubled. Some of the same plot beats occur, several attempts to pass by Sarah Jane, but we actually see a romantic context for them as well. Something that could not have been done, I don't think, in the 30s version anyway. By the late 50s, they were able to have her involved with a white boyfriend.
Yeah, as long as they don't show anything.
Right. And that scene is straight out of Technicolor noirs of the late 50s, like Party Girl.
Yeah, but Sirk takes everything further. Like, all of these scenes involving Sarah Jane, basically from that point on, are tawdry Americana expressionism. Like, they're drawn in the most stark, cartoonish, vulgar hell visions that you can imagine.
Yeah, I don't know if you could say that he takes it further than Party Girl or Some Came Running, which are the movies I was thinking of. Those also take things extremely far.
She's beaten
yes.
in an alley, bloody, falling down in a puddle of oil, soaked in filth.
Yeah, it's a horrifying image, yes.
That's as far as you can go.
It's true. No, I would say maybe they're all tied.
And he's using this vulgar American tawdry idiom to create this expressionist art and this heightened emotion in a way that, you know, the novel actually has that heightened emotion in it. Sirk gets that in his own way visually and with his editing and blocking, the way that Fannie Hurst does with her crazy prose.
Yeah, and the reflections.
Yeah.
We have that scene, this hellish scene with Susan Connor and America's sweetheart, Troy Donahue.
Yeah. In his first movie with Sandra Dee.
Yeah, playing a Hitler Youth type of guy.
No, he's just a normal rich kid.
But yeah,
but I mean, in Sirk's mind,
it's
there's
the same thing.
A literal equivalence because Sirk fled Nazi Germany with his Jewish wife.
Yeah, exactly.
And didn't he have a son who was involved in the Hitler Youth? I think he did, actually.
So this is the person that Sarah Jane feels like she's in love with, and as soon as he hears a rumor around town about who her mother might be, he turns into one of the worst monsters you will ever see in any film.
Well, because he had sex with a black woman.
Beats her mercilessly.
Yeah, and we have to watch it all. It's carefully laid out so that nothing is hidden.
Uses incredibly offensive language.
This is violence like, it's just this one short scene, but this is violence like you rarely saw in a movie.
And it hangs over the whole movie, obviously.
Yeah. And so this is like, I mean, this is one of Sirk's smartest innovations in the movie, to concentrate all of the violence of white supremacy into this one little symbolic scene. And he does talk in his, as I mentioned before, in his interview with James Harvey about Troy Donahue was kind of upset having to do this.
I bet he was. I hope he was.
And Sirk was like, no, you must understand, you are whitey. That is what you are. You are a symbol. You're not Troy Donahue. You're not a character.
Save that for a summer place. You can do that with Delmer Daves. For me, you're doing this. Now, while all of that's going on, we have Sandra Dee's struggles.
But this actually just makes her more resolved after she recovers from the initial...
Yeah, the lesson she learns from this is that...
I really need to pass better.
She just takes it for granted that this is what white guys are going to be like. So... as long as they think that you're from the right strata of society, they will not mistreat you. But of course, any of them would just turn on you and rip you to shreds if they find out this thing about you.
Which is, I guess, what...
that's a really, really dark picture.
I guess this is what Paola in the novel thinks her nice...
well, yeah, exactly.
veteran boyfriend's gonna have a little PTSD moment and take it out on her if she has a baby of the wrong color.
Of course. Yeah, and she's probably not wrong, right? I mean...
and to have love under those circumstances just adds to the horrifying bleakness of that novel.
Yep, definitely. While all of that's happening, Susie is having a rough time of her own.
And I do think it's incredible that, as I've already indicated, that the movie manages to make you almost as afraid for her. Just the general direction her psychological life is heading in. Almost as afraid for her as for Susan Connor.
Yeah, because her life has basically been arranged so that it's so perfect that any little thing that doesn't go according to plan could make her kill herself. Like, that's...
well, but you also see that she is genuinely very fragile. She doesn't really have... she's never felt she has any kind of love, and she doesn't have an identity. I mean, she's just a sad, nothing person. And she's been watching all this... like, you really get the feeling that this family is interwoven in this movie, and that she has been watching this horrible stuff happen to what amounts to her sister all of this time, and that this is, like, fucking traumatizing her. There is no one there for her in the family. Now,
well, Annie is there.
Annie is there, and of course, because of Sirk's ironies, she takes her for granted, because she is there.
But she also sees the example of how much Annie cares about and thinks about every little thing that's going on with Sarah Jane, and she wishes her mother would take that kind of time to think about her.
Sure.
So there's all of that going on, for sure. All she wants is a mother like Annie, and all Sarah Jane wants is to have a career like Lana Turner's.
Yeah, there's all these interwoven relationships in a really complex way, much more than... that Sirk is really good at. He does it in Written on the Wind, too.
Yeah.
Much more than in the Stahl movie.
Playing an important role in all of this is John Gavin, who is very important at first.
He's clueless and so handsome.
He recedes from the movie for a very long time after trying to issue an ultimatum that falls on deaf ears. He really tries to assert himself with Lana Turner.
Oh, you mean he's playing an important role as an object? I thought you meant as a character.
Well, he plays an important role in the plot, too, because when he returns, he precipitates Sandra Dee's crisis.
Yeah.
Which, again, this is straight out of the 1934 film in a slightly different way.
Yeah, because you actually feel like this is a crisis for her, whereas nothing convinces me of that in the 34 movie.
No, it's something that can be dealt with in the 34 film. And this one, yeah, it really does feel like...
well, for one thing, because any kind of emotional hangover she does have, we see in the 34 film, is going to be filled by this relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
Right? And this is not the case.
No, because Lana Turner really can't be the kind of mother that Sandra Dee wants.
I mean, I think we still believe that she loves her daughter.
Of course, but she has certain limitations as a person. It's not her fault.
And so Lana Turner in this movie actually accomplishes what B was attempting at the end of the novel, which is to move everybody around like chess pieces and kind of just set up... well, I guess she doesn't, though, because she has this blow up with the daughter instead, right? Because she did seem like she was going to have everything in place to end her career when she wants to, and she's got the devoted man, and then she's going to have her daughter with her, but then that doesn't work out because of this triangle.
Yeah, and Annie's death.
Yeah, and Annie's death.
Annie's death does bring them all together at the end in a way that is different from the way the 34 film ends.
Yeah, because like by the end it does look like possibly, other than Annie's death, that she is going to be able to be this matriarch. But
holding
is she
Sarah Jane like a mother would.
But is she equipped to is the question, whereas B at least thought she was.
It's an open question as the film ends, but that's the tableau we end on. The movie ends with the funeral procession, whereas the 34 film had the coda of the further goings-on in the Pullman family.
But that brings up, let's talk in more detail about the form that Sarah Jane's rebellion takes in this movie.
Probably most importantly, we have her dating life, which we've talked about, but also she has the scene where she disrupts the little discussion with the Italian filmmaker by bringing in hors d'oeuvres and delivering a vile, stereotypical performance of exactly the kind of role that was forced upon black actors in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, of servitude and slavery, as she...
And dialect.
Says to Laura's face. So that scene is very pleasurable for the viewer because that's what the character was not allowed to do in the 30s movie.
You can't just enjoy it because it really hurts Annie especially.
It's very, very complex, that whole scene and its aftermath, right?
Yeah.
Like, does this thing that is a way of directly confronting and expressing her resentment for white supremacy, which is not misplaced.
No, of course she's
she
right.
Has correctly identified the nature of the relationships within this household.
But the way the world is set up...
she's shamed for it. She's just a teenager, right?
Yeah, it's not just that, though. Everything she does that is kind of cool and empowering also blows up on her mother, who she loves. Like, she can't do both. She can't just have this loving relationship with her mother or assert herself in the world, because one or the other is going to pull at the wrong end of the string.
Yeah, they're just attached to each other. Like you said, that's her catch-22.
Exactly. So she just can't win no matter what she does.
But then there's also this amazing way in which Lana Turner's character comes into the kitchen and shames her and lectures her and demands to know, have I ever treated you unfairly? Which,
yeah, as if that matters anyway.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, her attempt to identify this target, which she has identified correctly, just dissolves in front of her because she can't point her finger at the place where she's being treated unequally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just dissolves. She knows she's right, but she's not going to be able to come up with the equation to prove it to this woman. Which, I mean, I've heard a lot of analysis of white liberalism from black commentators to that same effect.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Lana
White
Turner...
liberalism is worse than the expected conservative response.
Yeah,
sometimes.
well, I don't know. They're all just bad. I don't know how you decide what's worse.
Worse in that particular way. When you're being treated falsely nice.
Of course, in an interpersonal context, it probably feels worse. Yeah, it feels more demeaning, right? Or patronizing. That's what we're subjected to there. That's what we have to deal with in that scene. Feel it from Susan Connor's point of view, what it's like to get lectured by Lana Turner about race.
And what's lovely is that Lana Turner, in all of the scenes where she lectures her for her teenagerish behavior, which is how Laura sees it, is merely self-righteous in the way that only the female stars of this era
with glittering earrings
can come up with. Like, she's really actually angry. There's no sympathy in it.
No.
She can turn sympathetic right after, but first she's gonna tell this brat right off.
Yeah.
Power differential just is not occurring to her.
No, not at all. Like, it's sort of proving Susan Connor right in that moment. Yeah. Just because she can use that leverage against her in such a stark way.
And then we get the actual scenes in the vaudeville houses, which is more of this Sirk hellscape Americana, with that candle erection in the first one, and those
guys, those gross laughing guys.
All those laughing bald men, which are just, they're actual pin-up drawings of the 30s and 40s that depict exactly that, like the pin-up girl on the stage with the bald, laughing, toothless, gross guys. Like, there was sort of masochism incorporated within this type of artwork. The way he's creating these spaces is very Lynchian, and I thought in this one particularly of Laura in the
Canadian bar.
Laura in the Canadian bar, yeah. That whole scene where she goes dancing and speaking gibberish.
Welcome to Canada. Yeah.
in the back room, right? Donna later shows up.
Yeah, exactly. Where Donna gets rohypnoled, and she has to pull her out of there.
Yeah, and Annie, I guess, is Donna.
So yes, all of those scenes, Sarah Jane is doing her best to succeed in the entertainment world from the ground up. Like, first she's in kind of like a striptease joint, then she's in more of a Vegas-type show, although it's in Hollywood.
So you see Sirk is drawing this contrast along sexual lines in that Laura gets to, when someone tries to exploit Laura, even though she's a middle-aged actress trying to catch a break, she can just run out, squealing about her virtue and feel all sad and hurt about it at home. Whereas Sarah Jane has no choice but to sexually exploit herself in order to get off the ground as an actress.
Yeah. And that's basically as far as she's gotten when the movie catches up with her the last time.
That scene in the second
where they're drinking,
vaudeville house?
They're lying down. It's not a vaudeville house. That's like a Hollywood nightclub show.
Yeah,
that's like a huge deal. She's probably getting paid a lot of money for that.
It's a big floor show, but all her role is to sit on a revolving...
It's like a amusement park ride.
Yeah, some kind of revolving ride where all the girls are kicking their legs up to show their crotches.
And drinking martini glasses.
And swinging it like a bell. Like, it's just insane.
And that's where she has her final meeting with her mother. And that scene is incredibly affecting. The mother passes herself off as a hired nanny.
This is the textbook of how to write a melodrama scene and then how to perform it. This is the moment in the movie where that's just packed full of all of the body imagery from the novel, where the mother just like smothers her in her embrace, and there's the shot over the shoulder with Sarah Jane's face is just shocked, dazed.
Well, shocked out of her certainty that this is the only way she can go. She's kind of pulled back momentarily. She starts to tear up.
She's shattered.
Yeah.
She's just absolutely shattered by this contact. And
she's been trying to hold herself aloof from that, right? Because she knows it will confuse her.
It's that point where the audience, any audience member, is just, the tears are just like flooding.
Yeah. But then her friend walks into the dressing room and they have to separate and go back to the act that was kind of agreed upon.
I say
they're not related.
Any audience member, because this is specifically where James Harvey points to the scene to tell Sirk, that's really quite effective as melodrama. And Sirk is like, don't be ridiculous. I don't know how to do melodrama, so maybe it is, and I did it by accident.
Well, that's silly.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a very worthwhile discussion they had there.
There are movies he can't talk about this stuff, but when he talks about
All That Heaven Allows,
or Written on the Wind, which he liked, and talks about the characters and the dichotomous structures, he has intelligent things to say, but not about his use of emotion. I mean, why do you have to ask him about it? It's there. If you're feeling the emotion, it's intentional. Why do we have to? It's obvious.
Don't embarrass the man by making him talk about his feelings. Obviously, he had a kind of block about that. It all winds up in the funeral procession, which is
interesting here because it's a Deus Ex Machina that stops the plot completely because there's no reason for it. There's no, unless she is George Bailey 100 times over, because she's not an icon of any kind. She's not a public figure in this movie. So this is surreal.
Well, she's also given a lot of money, presumably, and she's paid up with all her lodges. And
yeah, no, but there's still an element of surrealism. But even in the novel, there is.
Well, no, in the novel, she makes it very clear. She's paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, it sounds like, to these churches. They're going to make a big deal about her death. That's where her ambition has all gone in the novel, that she has really made herself an important member of the community in New York, even though she's not from there and doesn't really even know those people. They know her as a massive donor.
Yeah, well, that happens after Paola leaves, because she needs to repent for Paola's sin of passing, right? Needs to atone for both of them. But I was going to say that, even originally in the novel, despite there being this rationale for the funeral is also just this symbol of excess. And the purpose it serves in this movie is, like I said, to just stop the plot dead because it's at an impasse. There's no way any of the characters can progress at this point. And so the funeral just calls that to a halt. And we just worship Annie, basically. And I didn't talk enough about, we talked about Louise Beaver's performance, but I haven't talked enough about Juanita Moore's performance. What this movie gets at in her performance and the way she's directed in the scenes and the way Sirk edits it is all of the talk that Annie does of being crucified by what happens to her daughter and what happens to her relationship to her daughter and having to deny her daughter. We watch Annie progressively be crucified.
Yeah.
As the purest kind of Christ figure in this movie. And
oh yeah, it takes its toll on her posture.
And we're the only
ones... agony in her face.
And we're the only ones seeing it every time. Just us.
Yeah, I mean, people occasionally ask her if she's not feeling well or whatever, but they don't seem to be seeing what's really happening to her.
And the camera reveals that just for us.
No, it's a tremendous performance by Juanita Moore. Because we're outside of that 30s and 40s context, she's able to give a more naturalistic performance than Louise Beaver's. Who
I think she still received some criticism.
Oh, well,
as
I'm
being
sure.
The character as being a mammy type, but it's way underplayed.
There's a lot less use of dialect. The kinds of things that do make the 1934 film hard to watch in some ways.
And she is basically the same size as Lana Turner and very pretty and youthful until, of course, the events take their toll on her.
Yeah.
So the body stuff is actually in the way those crucial couple of scenes where contact is made, how they're handled. It's not contained within her figure.
No.
But the way bodies interact, mother and daughter bodies. And there's a parallel scene where Lana Turner hugs Sandra Dee, and Sandra Dee has a very similar reaction.
Another thing that's actually interesting about the way the movie ends, when Annie's talking about the people she wants at the funeral and what she wants to do with her money, she calls back to the milkman that gave them a break right at the beginning of the movie. She is the person that is not going to forget what was going on before fame and fortune. Lana Turner, like her whole life is about, and the whole American success ethic is about moving on and forgetting about any hardship that you might have encountered.
It's true. That one was a bit gilding the lily of sainthood for me there.
I don't know. I like that.
You like
I
that
thought
touch?
That was good.
Very Dickensian.
It's kind of crucial because that's the whole point, is that even if she wanted to partake of the success ethic, she can't. So yeah, she lives in $1 million country estate as well, but she's still in a subservient position, and she would never forget about what life was like before all of these good things started to happen, because life still isn't quite what she would want it to be anyway.
And it seems like what keeps her there in this case is this complex, like you really do believe in this complex sort of family relationship with all the disappointments of family that has, and jealousies and rivalries that has developed between all of the characters. This is such an immense film.
It is. But I think we'll probably have to stop talking about it here.
Yeah, because you've got a lot to edit, and I need to sleep right now.
So next week, Elise, we'll be sticking with Claudette Colbert for Private Worlds, the 1935 film directed by Gregory LaCava.
Well, that's fun. We've seen that before.
And Peter Ibbotson, directed by Henry Hathaway.
It's a really crazy pairing.
So that is Paramount 1935, Hollywood Studios Year by Year.
All right.
See you then.
Bye-bye.